Chapter 1: The Descent Point. The air in the Neuralink chamber possessed a sterile hum, a low thrumming counterpoint to the rhythmic hiss of oxygen regulators. Dr. Kalen Vance surveyed the primary console, his reflection a pale shadow on the darkened screen. Banks of monitors displayed complex schematics, biological telemetry, and the serene, unmoving face of subject anamnesis, projected from the adjoining medical suite. Light from the readouts cast long, dancing shadows across the polished floor. Dr. Samira Ishak adjusted the final sensor array on her own console, her movements precise, economical. A stray lock of dark hair escaped her tight bun. She tucked it away without breaking concentration. All biosigns stable, Kalen. Cortical activity is minimal, as expected. We have a clean baseline. Her voice was calm, a practiced composure that belied the unconventional nature of their current endeavor. Marcus Mac Cole, leaning against a support pillar with his arms crossed, grunted. Clean as a morgue slab. You too ready to go poke around in someone else's bad dreams. Still gives me the creeps. Mac's role was technical oversight, the fail-safe operator, the one who stayed outside. His skepticism was a familiar, almost comforting drone. Vance straightened, his gaze fixed on the image of subject anamnesis. This isn't about dreams, Mac. The preliminary scans, the fragmented psychic echoes we picked up, they suggest a deep, structured ancestral memory complex. Something unique, something potentially valuable. The value was a closely guarded secret, known only to the highest echelons of the Institute. Subject anamnesis. A man named Daniel Carter before his unexplained descent into profound coma, apparently held keys to unlocking certain genetic predispositions, historical data caches encoded deep within the human genome. Or so the theory went. The Institute was betting heavily on it. Valuable enough to send you two swimming in his subconscious, Mac observed, pushing himself off the pillar. He moved to his own command station, a separate, hardened unit designed for emergency overrides. Comms check, Ishak. Loud and clear, Mac, Samira replied, her fingers already flying across her interface, initiating the final sequence. Vance. Solid link, Kalen confirmed. He settled into the immersion chair, the cool gel supports molding to his form. Samira did likewise in the chair beside him. The articulated arms of the Neuralink apparatus descended, delicate filaments poised inches from their temples. The entry vector is keyed to the shallowest identified psychic stratum, Kalen recited, a final procedural check. Minimal resistance anticipated. We establish a stable cognitive foothold, assess the integrity of the Matryoshka structure, then proceed layer by layer. Our primary objective is to map the ancestral pathways, identify the core trauma that precipitated the coma, and if possible, initiate a cognitive reset. Samira's voice joined his, a practice duet. Secondary objective, data retrieval concerning specific ancestral epochs showing heightened mnemonic resonance. Avoid direct confrontation with dominant psychic constructs unless unavoidable. Maintain team cohesion. Any sign of psychic contamination or significant biofeedback anomalies, and Mac pulls us. You got it, Mac affirmed, his eyes scanning his own readouts. Initiating sequence in 5, 4, 3. The world dissolved, not into darkness but into a cacophony of pure, unfiltered sensory data. Kalen clenched his jaw against a wave of vertigo. It was a torrent of abstract colors, roaring static, the scent of ozone and something else, something old and dusty. He felt his corporeal form dissipate, replaced by a raw point of awareness buffeted by the psychic storm. Samira's presence was a faint pressure beside him, a kindred spark in the chaos. Stabilizing, anchor point establishing. Kalen's mental voice, transmitted through the link, was strained. He focused, forcing his will against the tide, shaping the raw data into something comprehensible. The storm receded, not abruptly, but like a tide pulling away from a shore. Colors coalesced, sounds sharpened. The scent of dust intensified, now mixed with the faint aroma of dried flowers and old wood. They stood or perceived themselves standing in a room. It was a child's bedroom, seemingly ordinary. A small wooden bed neatly made, a rocking horse, its paint faded and chipped. Bookshelves lined with worn storybooks. Sunlight, thick with motes, streamed through a mullioned window. It was quaint, almost peaceful, deceptively so. Layer 1 secured, Samira's thought voice sounded, tinged with caution. Initial environment appears, benign. Kalen scanned the room. Everything was slightly off. The proportions of the furniture were subtly wrong, a little too large, a little too small. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper than they ought to be. A persistent, almost subaudible hum resonated in the air, the same hum they'd heard in the Neuralink chamber, but now it carried an undercurrent of something else, a sorrowful melody played on a broken string. Benign is a relative term in here, Samira, Kalen projected. Stay alert. Mac, are you receiving telemetry from this layer? Affirmative, Mac's voice came through, tinny and distant, a lifeline to the outside. Psychic pressure is low, but there's a strange harmonic distortion I can't quite isolate, like feedback. Kalen moved towards the window. Outside there was no yard, no street, only a swirling, opalescent mist that roiled like a living thing. He could see faint shapes moving within it, too indistinct to identify. The boundaries of this layer are ill-defined. It feels contained. Samira approached a small writing desk. On it lay an open sketchbook. The drawings were childlike, crude stick figures, but one depicted a screaming face, eyes wide, mouth a perfect O of terror. Beneath it, a single word was scrawled, loud. As if summoned by the image, it began. A sound. It wasn't a sound in the room. It was a sound of the room, of the very fabric of this mental construct. It started as a low vibration, a tremor in the floorboards, a rattling of the window panes. Then it grew, swelling into a piercing, impossibly high-pitched shriek that bypassed the ears and drilled directly into their consciousness. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, the scream of something witnessing an unbearable horror. Kalen staggered, his mental hands flying to his temples. Pain, white-hot and blinding, lanced through his awareness. He felt Samira's presence falter beside him, her psychic signature flickering like a dying flame. The room itself seemed to warp and twist around the scream, the walls buckling, the colors bleeding into a nauseating smear. The echo of the first scream. This had to be it. An ancestral memory, so potent, so raw, it had imprinted itself onto the very structure of this initial psychic layer. Max spike in psychic pressure, severe cognitive assault. Kalen managed to project, his own mental voice strained to the breaking point. The scream intensified, threatening to shatter their fragile foothold in this alien mindscape. The quaint child's room was dissolving, melting away under the onslaught of a terror that transcended generations. This was no dream. This was an archive of pain, and they had just tripped its oldest, loudest alarm. The descent had only just begun, and already the abyss was screaming back. Chapter 2: Whispers in the Static. The unbearable shriek, the echo of the first scream, receded as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a ringing silence and a residue of profound unease. Kalen found himself crouched, his mental form trembling. He reached out, a tendril of thought toward Samira. Her psychic signature was weak, frayed. Samira, report. His mental voice was tight. A pause then, stabilizing, auditory, no psychic trauma, disorienting, that was intense. Her projected thoughts were shaky but coherent. Max status, Kalen demanded, pushing himself to a standing position within the now-stabilized child's room. The furniture had righted itself, the colors settled, but the air thrummed with a lingering tension. The pleasant facade was irrevocably cracked. Massive energy surge, Vance, Mac's voice crackled through the comms, laced with genuine concern. Nearly overloaded the primary buffers. What in God's name was that? Ancestral trauma. Highly concentrated, Kalen replied, his internal sensors, the extensions of his own mind interfacing with the Neuralink, already analyzing the residual psychic spore. The patient, Daniel Carter, his lineage must have experienced something cataclysmic. That was a primal fear response, imprinted deep. Samira was examining the sketchbook again, her focus narrowed on the crude drawing of the screaming face. The word loud, a child's interpretation of an overwhelming sensory event. Perhaps a memory passed down, distorted through generations, until it became this psychic shrapnel. The room, while superficially unchanged, now bore a different weight. The shadows seemed to pulse. The eyes of the rocking horse appeared to follow their movements. The faint, sorrowful melody Kalen had noticed earlier was more distinct, a lament woven into the static hum of the mindscape. We need to understand this layer before we can move deeper, Kalen stated. This isn't just Carter's childhood, it's a palimpsest, his personal memories overlaid on something much older. He walked towards a wall adorned with framed photographs. At first glance, they appeared to be typical family snapshots, a smiling couple, a child on a tricycle. But as Kalen focused, the details shifted. The clothing of the couple subtly aged, the style morphing into something from an earlier century. The tricycle became a crude wooden toy. The smiles on the faces seemed to strain, hinting at a deep-seated anxiety. The temporal instability is significant, Samira murmured, joining him. It's like looking through layers of tracing paper, each one an ancestor, each one leaving their mark on this foundational memory. A small, almost imperceptible movement near the door caught Kalen's attention. He turned slowly. Standing in the doorway, partially obscured by shadow, was a child. A young boy, no older than 7, with wide, dark eyes and tangled hair. He wore simple, old-fashioned clothes, a linen shirt, patched trousers. He watched them with an unnerving stillness. "Hello," Samira projected, her mental voice gentle, non-threatening. "Are you Daniel?" The child did not respond verbally. He simply tilted his head, a slow, curious gesture. Then he raised a small hand and pointed towards a faded patch of wallpaper beside the bookshelf. The pattern there was complex, almost floral, but as they looked closer, it seemed to resolve into a series of interconnected lines, like a crude map or a family tree. "Is that a clue?" Kalen wondered. He moved towards the wallpaper, Samira following. The child remained in the doorway, a silent observer. As Kalen reached out to touch the wallpaper, the child spoke. Its voice was not that of a young boy. It was older, smoother, with an unsettling resonance. "They wait below, the old ones, the hungry ones." Kalen and Samira recoiled. This was no mere psychic echo of Daniel Carter. "Who are you?" Kalen demanded, his mental defenses flaring. The child's form flickered like a poorly tuned image. For a fraction of a second, the boy's face elongated, the eyes sinking into shadowed sockets before snapping back to the innocent facade. The shifting ancestor. It was toying with them, testing their reactions. "A guide," the entity's voice purred, its childlike form a disturbing vessel. "Or a warning, depends on what you seek, and what you are willing to lose." It gestured again to the wallpaper. "The roots run deep, deeper than you imagine." Suddenly, the floor beneath their feet began to tremble, not with the piercing intensity of the echo, but with a low, powerful rumble, as if something immense were stirring in the psychic depths beneath them. The wallpaper with the strange patterns began to crack, fissures spreading like dark veins. Dust sifted from the ceiling. "Mac, the layer is destabilizing," Samira cried out, "structural integrity failing." "I see it." Mac's voice was urgent. "There's a massive energy sink forming below your position. It's pulling this entire construct down." The child in the doorway smiled, a slow, chilling expression that did not belong on its young face. "The hungry ones are waking. They sense new blood." The floorboards groaned, then splintered. A section near the window collapsed inward, revealing not another room, but a churning abyss of shadow and distorted light. The pull was immense, a psychic vortex threatening to drag them into the unknown. "We need to find an anchor point to a deeper layer, or we'll be torn apart with this one," Kalen shouted, his mental voice struggling against the rising chaos. He scanned the disintegrating room, searching for a pathway, a psychic current they could ride. The shifting ancestor, still in its child form, glided effortlessly towards the collapsing section of the floor. It paused at the precipice, looking back at them, its eyes glinting with an ancient, cold amusement. "This way, little explorers. The journey truly begins now." With a final, mocking smile, the child figure stepped into the abyss and vanished. The pull intensified. The room was breaking apart around them, the comforting illusion of a child's bedroom shattering to reveal the raw, terrifying mechanics of a mind under immense duress. They had no choice but to follow, plunging into the darkness, into the waiting maw of subject anamnesis's ancestral past. Chapter 3: The Bone Fields. The transition was brutal, a vertiginous drop through screaming psychic static and flashes of disjointed imagery, faces contorted in pain, ancient tools, glimpses of primeval forests. Kalen fought to maintain his orientation, his connection to Samira a tenuous thread in the maelstrom. When the chaotic descent finally slowed, it was not to a gentle stop, but to a jarring impact on what felt like hard, uneven ground. The sensory input that flooded their awareness was starkly different from the cloying, deceitful domesticity of the previous layer. A biting wind, smelling of dust and decay, whipped at their perceived forms. The light was dim, a perpetual twilight filtering through a sky the color of bruised plums, choked with roiling, ash-like clouds. They stood on a vast, undulating plain, littered as far as the eye could see with bones. Bones of every shape and size. Rib cages, bleached white, arched from the cracked earth like the skeletal remains of beached leviathans. Femurs and tibias lay scattered like fallen branches. Skulls, mostly animalistic but with unnervingly humanoid variations, stared with empty sockets at the oppressive sky. The ground crunched under their psychic feet with each step, a symphony of brittle fracture. "Report," Kalen projected, his mental voice flat, trying to mask the awe and revulsion this new layer inspired. "Cognitive integrity, maintained." Samira's thought form wavered slightly beside him. She was surveying the desolate vista, her usual composure strained. "This place, it reeks of death, of immense, prolonged suffering." "Prehistoric stratum, I'd wager," Kalen observed, kneeling to examine a massive, fossilized vertebra half buried in the dust. "The raw material of survival. This is where the deep fears were forged." Mac's voice, when it came, was faint, riddled with interference. "Signal, weak. Vance, you there? This layer is dense, like trying to transmit through lead." "We're here, Mac," Kalen responded, focusing his mental energy to boost the transmission. "This is significantly deeper. The psychic pressure is immense. Maintain the link if you can." "Trying. Readings are all over the place. Biosignatures unstable." Mac's voice faded into static before cutting out completely. "Mac," Samira called out, a thread of alarm in her tone. "We've lost him." Kalen swore internally. The density of this ancestral memory is shielding us from the Neuralink's carrier wave. We're on our own for now. He straightened. "We need to find a stable psychic current, something that might lead us to a more permeable stratum or back towards the shallower layers." The wind howled, carrying with it faint whispers, sighs of long-dead things. There were no landmarks, only the endless expanse of bone and dust beneath the bruised sky. A profound sense of isolation settled upon them, heavier than the psychic pressure. As they began to move, picking their way through the osseous debris, Samira clutched her head. "Kalen, something's wrong. I'm so hungry." Kalen stopped. "Hungry? That's impossible. We're non-corporeal. It's a psychic bleed-through from the layer." "No, it's more than that," she insisted, her mental voice strained. "It's a gnawing, a desperate aching emptiness. I can't think." Her psychic signature flickered again, more erratically this time. Then Kaelin experienced it too. A phantom hunger, so intense it felt like his very essence was being consumed from within. It wasn't just a physical sensation. It was a crushing wave of despair, the hopelessness of starvation, the terror of a body eating itself. The hunger maw. It wasn't a visible entity here, not yet, but its influence permeated this desolate layer, an invisible miasma of want. Fight it, Samira, Kaelin urged, though his own focus was wavering. The bones around them seemed to sharpen, the landscape itself becoming a monument to deprivation. It's an echo, the memory of famine. This layer is saturated with it. Can't focus. Samira's thought form was dimming, her cohesion loosening. Suddenly, a figure detached itself from the gloom ahead. Tall and gaunt, draped in what looked like stitched-together animal hides, its face obscured by a crude wooden mask carved into a leering snarl. It carried a heavy, stone-tipped spear. The shifting ancestor, in a new, more primal guise. Lost little spirits, its voice echoed in their minds, no longer the purring child, but a harsh, guttural rasp. The old ones are always hungry. This place remembers hunger well. It gestured with its spear towards Samira. She feels it. She understands. Samira was swaying, her psychic form flickering violently. The phantom hunger was overwhelming her. Kaelin tried to reach for her, to reinforce her mental defenses, but the shifting ancestor moved with surprising speed, interposing itself. She is closer to the truth of this place, the entity rasped. Let her embrace it. Get away from her, Kaelin projected, marshaling his own psychic energy into a defensive pulse. The entity merely laughed, a dry, rustling sound. The ground beneath Samira seemed to darken, the dust coalescing into a swirling vortex of shadow. Within the vortex, Kaelin could almost perceive teeth, endless rows of them, grinding in anticipation. The hunger maw was attempting to manifest, drawn by Samira's weakening state, amplified by the shifting ancestor's malevolent influence. This world consumes, the shifting ancestor declared, its masked face turning towards Kaelin. As it consumed those who came before, you cannot escape your nature, you cannot escape the hunger. Samira cried out, a pure sound of psychic agony, as the shadowy vortex began to envelop her legs. The gnawing hunger Kaelin experienced intensified tenfold, threatening to tear his own consciousness apart. He had to break her free, but the shifting ancestor stood ready, spear poised, a guardian of this realm of starvation and despair. Isolated, cut off from the outside, and facing two distinct, terrifying manifestations of ancestral horror, Kaelin realized the true, brutal nature of the Matryoshka brain was only just beginning to reveal itself. The price of knowledge was etched in bone and paid in unending want. Chapter 4: Woven Nightmares. The shadowy tendrils of the hunger maw coiled around Samira's psychic form, pulling her down. Her mental cries were sharp, fractured shards of terror and an overwhelming, agonizing emptiness. Kaelin lunged, not physically, but with a focused blast of cognitive energy aimed at the point where the maw's influence touched Samira. He poured his will into the attack, picturing a searing light, a negation of the consuming void. The shifting ancestor, in its primal hunter guise, reacted instantly, its stone-tipped spear whistling through the psychic ether. Kalen twisted his awareness, the spearhead grazing his periphery, sending a jolt of icy pain through his mental construct. He ignored it, concentrating his assault on the maw. His mental blast struck the vortex. There was no explosion, no satisfying impact, but the shadows recoiled slightly, the gnawing hunger lessening for a precious second. Samira's psychic signature flared, a desperate spark. "Samira, focus on my signal. Fight it," Kalen projected, pushing more energy into the link between them, trying to create a lifeline against the psychic undertow. The shifting ancestor pressed its attack, its movements swift and brutal. It was a manifestation of a survivor, a predator from an age where hesitation meant death. Kalen was forced to divide his attention, parrying the ancestor's spear thrusts with hastily formed mental shields while simultaneously trying to pry Samira from the maw's grip. "You cannot save her," the ancestor's guttural voice rasped in his mind. "She belongs to the hunger. It is her inheritance." "She belongs to no one but herself," Kalen retorted, his own anger flaring, a hot counterpoint to the cold despair of the bone fields. He saw an opening. As the ancestor lunged, Kalen sidestepped its spear and drove a concentrated pulse of disruptive energy directly into the entity's masked face. The shifting ancestor staggered, its form flickering wildly. The hunter guise momentarily overlaid with a dozen other faces. A wizened crone, a terrified soldier, a stern-faced matriarch, before settling back into the primal warrior. But the momentary disruption was enough. Kalen seized the chance, focusing all his will on Samira. "Now, Samira, pull." He felt her respond, a surge of desperate effort. The shadowy tendrils loosened their grip. With a final, agonizing wrench, her psychic form tore free from the vortex, leaving behind a howling void where the hunger maw had begun to coalesce. She collapsed, her mental signature weak but intact beside Kalen. The maw's oppressive influence receded, though the gnawing phantom hunger lingered, a dull ache in their non-existent stomachs. The shifting ancestor, recovering quickly, let out a frustrated snarl. It raised its spear, preparing for another assault, but then paused. Its masked head tilted, as if listening to something Kalen couldn't perceive. A slow, cunning look entered its posture. "Perhaps not this way," it muttered, its form beginning to waver. "There are other tapestries to unwind." With that cryptic pronouncement, the primal warrior dissolved into the dusty air, vanishing as if it were never there. Kalen rushed to Samira's side. "Are you all right?" "Weak, so weak," she projected, her voice thin. "The hunger, it was, devouring me from the inside. Thank you, Kalen." "We need to get out of this lair," Kalen stated, scanning the desolate landscape. The oppressive atmosphere, the constant psychic drain of the pervasive hunger, was unsustainable. There has to be a conduit, a way deeper or out. They moved with renewed urgency, the bone-littered plain stretching endlessly. After what felt like an eternity of trudging through the grim twilight, they perceived a change in the psychic terrain. The ground began to slope downwards, leading towards a vast, shadowed cleft in the earth, a gaping wound in the mindscape. From its depths emanated a faint, rhythmic pulsing, like a slow, giant heartbeat. "There," Kalen said, pointing towards the chasm. "That feels different, a stronger psychic current." Cautiously, they approached the edge. The chasm was immense, its bottom lost in impenetrable darkness. But lining its walls, they could see intricate, web-like structures, glowing faintly with an internal luminescence. These were not geological formations, but something woven. As they descended into the chasm, the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of old parchment, dust, and something else, something uniquely organic and unsettling. The rhythmic pulsing grew stronger. The web-like structures resolved into colossal, intricate tapestries, hanging like silken banners in the vast, subterranean space. They depicted scenes of incredible complexity and horror, figures writhing in flames, bodies twisted by plague, armies clashing under blood-red skies, families starving in desolate landscapes. Each thread seemed to pulse with a captured emotion, a stored agony. At the heart of this immense cavern, suspended amidst the horrifying tapestries, was their creator, the Loom Mother. She was a nightmarish fusion of arachnid and human. Her lower body was a bulbous, multi-legged monstrosity, anchored to the cavern walls by thick, shimmering threads. Her upper torso was that of an ancient woman, her face a mask of serene, timeless wisdom, yet her eyes held a chilling emptiness. Dozens of slender, human-like arms, each ending in needle-sharp fingers, moved with hypnotic grace, plucking threads of light and shadow from the very air, weaving them into the ever-expanding tapestries of ancestral suffering. She turned her ancient, unblinking gaze upon them as they entered her domain. Her mental voice was not a sound, but a pervasive sensation, like silk brushing against raw nerves. More threads for my loom, more stories to be woven. Kalen and Samira froze, awestruck and horrified. This entity was on a completely different scale from the shifting ancestor or the diffuse threat of the hunger maw. This was a primal force, an archivist of agony. "What are you?" Samira managed to project, her voice trembling. "I am the weaver. I am the memory. I am the pattern that binds your short lives to the long echoes of those who bled and wept before you," the Loom Mother responded, one of her many hands gesturing towards a newly forming section of tapestry. It depicted a scene shockingly familiar: two figures, Kalen and Samira, standing at the edge of a bone-littered plain. Every joy, every sorrow, every terror, it all comes to my loom. One of her arms, impossibly long and slender, reached out towards Samira. Its touch was light, yet it carried an immense psychic weight. Samira cried out, her form flickering as if a thread were being pulled from her very essence. "Such vibrant colors in your fear, little one," the Loom Mother mused, her serene face a terrifying contrast to her words. "Such strong threads of desperation. They will make a fine addition to the pattern." The arm began to draw Samira closer, towards a gap in an immense, unfolding tapestry that depicted a brutal witch trial, complete with pyre and screaming accusers. Kalen could see Samira's own likeness beginning to form within the woven scene, her face contorted in terror as spectral flames licked at her feet. She was being literally woven into an ancestral nightmare. Chapter 5. Fractured Lineage. No, Kalen launched himself forward, not with a physical body, but as a spear of pure will, aimed at the slender, weaving arm that was drawing Samira into the horrifying tapestry. He slammed his focused psychic energy into the arm, trying to sever the connection, to break the thread. The loom mother barely registered the impact. Her ancient eyes, holding centuries of sorrow, flickered towards him. Ah, the protector, your threads are coarser, more resistant, but they too will join the weave. Another of her many arms, swift as a striking serpent, shot out and wrapped around Kalen's mental form. It wasn't a constricting grip, but a binding one, as if his very essence were being unspooled. He struggled, but the loom mother's power was immense, diffuse, rooted in the very fabric of this ancestral stratum. He could feel his own memories, his fears, his deepest anxieties being tugged at, assessed, ready to be incorporated into her grotesque masterpiece. Samira screamed, a raw psychic sound of agony as her likeness in the tapestry became more defined, spectral flames now engulfing her woven form. The experience was clearly not just visual. She was living the terror of that ancestral witch burning, the searing heat, the suffocating smoke, the hateful faces of the mob. "This is how it is, little ones," the loom mother's silken voice whispered in their minds. "The past is not dead. It is not even past. It lives in you. It is you, and I am its keeper." Kalen fought against the unraveling sensation, against the pull of the loom mother's will. He had to break this. He couldn't overpower her directly. She was too vast, too ancient. He needed a different approach. He remembered the shifting ancestors' words. The roots run deep. Perhaps the loom mother herself was not the ultimate source, but another manifestation, another guardian of something even deeper. "What is the purpose of this?" Kalen projected, forcing calmness into his mental voice, fighting the rising panic. "This endless cycle of reliving pain." The loom mother paused in her weaving, a fraction of a second of stillness in her constant motion. "Purpose. There is no purpose. There is only the pattern, the repetition, the echo, unless a thread is strong enough to change the weave." Her gaze, ancient and unreadable, fixed on Kalen. A thread strong enough. Was that a challenge, a clue? Samira's psychic screams were weakening, her mental signature dimming as she was consumed by the ancestral nightmare. Kalen had to act fast. He focused on the tapestry itself, not on the loom mother. If the threads were memories, emotions, perhaps they could be rewoven or at least disrupted. He poured his psychic energy not into an attack, but into a specific frequency, a disruptive harmonic he hoped would interfere with the cohesion of the threads binding Samira. He pictured static, noise, a severing of connections. The tapestry around Samira's woven image flickered. The spectral flames sputtered. Samira gasped, a flicker of her own consciousness returning. The loom mother let out a sound that was almost a sigh, a whisper of wind through ancient, hollow bones. A discordant note, interesting. Her grip on Kalen tightened slightly. "This isn't just their pain, is it?" Kalen pressed, sensing a potential weakness, a crack in her omniscient facade. "It's your pain, too. You are bound to this loom, to these memories." For the first time, a flicker of something other than serene detachment crossed the loom mother's ancient face. A shadow of sorrow, perhaps, or weariness. "I am the archive," she stated, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Kalen pushed harder with his disruptive frequency. The section of tapestry holding Samira began to unravel, threads fraying, colors bleeding. Samira's psychic form, now free from the immediate torment of the burning, slumped, exhausted but coherent. "Enough!" The loom mother's voice gained a sharper edge. Several of her arms shot towards Kalen, not to bind but to strike, to silence the discordant note. But before they could reach him, a new presence made itself known. From the shadows of the cavern a figure emerged. It was Daniel Carter, the subject anamnesis, or at least a projection of him. Not the distant, comatose patient, but a focused, almost solid manifestation. His eyes, however, were not his own. They burned with an intelligent, ancient light, and his expression was one of cold, calculating fury. It was the shifting ancestor, wearing the patient's own form like a stolen suit. "She grows tiresome, this old spider," the Carter form said, its voice a chilling blend of Daniel Carter's natural tones and the shifting ancestor's sibilant whisper. It raised a hand, and the very air around the loom mother seemed to crackle with an unseen energy. The loom mother recoiled, her many arms drawing back, a look of genuine alarm on her ancient face. You should not be able to manifest so strongly here." "This mind is accommodating," the shifting ancestor Carter replied with a thin smile. "And you, dear weaver, have outlived your usefulness in this particular pattern." It gestured, and several of the massive tapestries around them began to rip and tear, not from Kalen's efforts, but from a force wielded by this new, powerful iteration of the shifting ancestor. The cavern began to shake. The rhythmic pulsing in the air became erratic, discordant. The loom mother shrieked, a sound of breaking silk and shattering glass, as her precious weavings were destroyed. "What are you doing?" Kalen demanded of the shifting ancestor. "Revising the narrative," it said, its burning eyes fixed on Kalen and Samira. "And you, explorers, have served your purpose as a catalyst." It turned its attention fully to the distressed loom mother. "Your time is done, old one." The shifting ancestor advanced on the loom mother, energy gathering around its hands. The very structure of this ancestral layer was coming apart. Kalen grabbed Samira's weakened psychic form. "We need to get out of here. Now." The way they had come was blocked by collapsing debris and tearing tapestries. But amidst the chaos, Kalen saw it, a shimmering fissure opening in the far wall of the cavern, a pulsating light that felt different, younger, less burdened by eons of sorrow. "There," he pointed, "that's our way out." They plunged towards the fissure as the shifting ancestor engaged the wounded loom mother in a devastating psychic battle, the very foundations of the ancestral mindscape crumbling around them. They were escaping one nightmare, only to be hurled, Kalen suspected, into another, orchestrated by an entity far more cunning and malevolent than they had first realized. The Matryoshka Brain was not just a passive repository of horrors. It was an active, intelligent battlefield, and they were merely pawns in a game whose rules they were only beginning to comprehend. The core of Daniel Carter's trauma and the secrets of his fractured lineage remained buried, perhaps guarded by the most terrifying ancestor of all. Chapter 6: The Sunless City. The passage through the shimmering fissure was less a controlled transition and more a violent expulsion. Kalen and Samira were flung through a vortex of disorienting sensations: the screech of tearing metal, the scent of stagnant water and cold stone, the oppressive feeling of immense weight. They landed, not with a crash but with a sickening psychic thud, onto a surface that felt like rough, uneven cobblestone. Darkness, not the absolute void of the deepest mental strata, but a profound, heavy gloom, broken only by faint, sickly green phosphorescence emanating from patches of lichen-like growth on towering, unseen structures. The air was cold, damp, and carried the metallic tang of rust and something else. Something akin to despair, but more organized, more civilized in its misery. Samira, status, Kalen projected, his mental voice echoing slightly in the vast, unseen space. He was still supporting her weakened psychic form. Here, she replied, her thought voice steadier than before but laced with exhaustion. The burning, it felt so real. She shuddered, a purely psychic tremor. Where are we now? Kalen extended his senses. They were in what felt like a city, or the ruin of one. Immense, cyclopean architecture rose around them, invisible in the gloom but palpable as vast presences pressing in. The ground was indeed cobblestone, slick with moisture. The rhythmic pulsing they had felt in the Loom Mother's cavern was gone, replaced by a low, almost subaudible thrum, like distant, malfunctioning machinery. Another layer, Kalen stated. Urban, I think, but ancient and abandoned, or so it seems. Faintly from the oppressive darkness came a sound, a rhythmic clanking, a metallic scraping growing steadily closer. It was a labored, unnatural sound, devoid of any organic cadence. Company, Samira whispered, her psychic signature tensing. Kalen pulled her back, deeper into the shadow of what felt like a colossal, crumbling archway. The clanking grew louder, accompanied by a wheezing, steam-like hiss. A figure emerged from the gloom, illuminated faintly by the phosphorescent lichen. It was humanoid, but grotesquely so. Its limbs were elongated, spindly, made of what looked like rusted iron struts and leaking pipes. Its torso was a battered, riveted boiler from which puffs of acrid steam escaped with each breath. Its head was a bird-cage-like contraption of wires and gears, within which a single, dim bulb pulsed with a sickly yellow light. It dragged one leg, the source of the scraping sound, and carried a long, metallic pole, perhaps a tool, perhaps a weapon. Automaton, Samira breathed, her horror palpable. Or something worse. The metallic creature shuffled past their hiding place, its single glowing eye casting a weak, searching beam into the darkness. It seemed to be patrolling or perhaps searching for something. It moved with a jerky, inefficient gait, a relic of a forgotten, industrialized age. This layer, it feels like a failed utopia, Kalen mused, watching the automaton recede. A city built on a dream that turned into a nightmare of rust and decay. This had to be an echo of a more recent ancestral period, perhaps early industrial revolution, but twisted, amplified by the psychic distress of the Matryoshka brain. The shifting ancestor, Samira said. It wanted us here. It destroyed the loom mother's layer to force us into this one. Why? I don't know, Kalen admitted, but it called us catalysts. It's using us, for what purpose I can't fathom. He looked around the oppressive, dark city. This place feels trapped, stagnant. The horrors here might be less primal than the bone fields, less symbolic than the loom mother's tapestries, but no less dangerous. They began to move cautiously through the echoing streets, the silence broken only by the distant clanking of other patrolling automatons and the drip of water from unseen heights. The architecture was overwhelming, brutalist in its scale, built for giants or forgotten gods. Doorways were gaping maws. Windows were sightless eyes staring into the perpetual twilight. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the gloom. A faint, melancholic melody, played on what sounded like a out-of-tune piano. It was coming from a large, crumbling structure nearby, one of the few that still showed signs of a less utilitarian design, with broken arches and remnants of ornate carvings. Music, Samira questioned, her head tilted. In a place like this. Could be a trap, Kalen warned, or a point of focus, something less mechanical. He felt a pull towards the sound, a faint resonance that suggested a pocket of more coherent psychic energy within this decaying urban landscape. They approached the structure. It appeared to have been a grand hall or theater, its facade now cracked and stained. The main doors were gone, leaving a dark, inviting entrance. The melancholic piano music drifted out, surprisingly clear amidst the oppressive silence. We need information, Kalen decided. We need to understand the rules of this layer if we're to find a way through it or deeper, and we need to re-establish contact with Mac. They stepped inside. The interior was vast, a cavernous auditorium. Rows of seats covered in dust and cobwebs faced a distant stage. The only light came from a few flickering gas lamps, another anachronism, casting long, dancing shadows. On the stage, silhouetted against the gloom, a figure sat at a dilapidated grand piano, its back to them, playing the sad, repetitive tune. As they moved closer, the figure at the piano slowly turned. It was a woman, or the psychic echo of one. She was dressed in elegant but tattered Victorian-era clothing. Her face was pale, her eyes large and dark, filled with an immeasurable sadness. Her fingers, long and slender, continued to move over the yellowed keys, even as she faced them. "Visitors," she said, her voice soft like rustling silk, yet carrying clearly through the vast hall. "It has been so long since we had visitors." She did not seem surprised nor overtly hostile, just weary. "Who are you?" Kalen asked, keeping his mental tone neutral. "I am a memory," she replied, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "A keeper of what was, before the silence fell, before the Watchers took over." "The Watchers?" Samira inquired, glancing nervously towards the dark entrance, as if expecting the clanking automatons to appear. "Those who walk the streets now," the woman said, her gaze distant. "They were meant to serve, to build, but the city, it died, and they changed. Now they only maintain the decay." Her fingers faltered on the keys, a dissonant chord echoing through the hall. They don't like music, they don't like anything that remembers. We are looking for a way through this place, Callan stated, a way deeper into the mind. The woman's sad eyes focused on him. Deeper. There is only more sorrow deeper. This city is a prison of regret. The architect, he built it so. The architect, Callan seized on the word. Who is the architect? The one who dreamed this city, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The one whose grief laid every stone, whose despair forged every gear of the watchers. He is the heart of this lair, and its curse. She looked back at her piano. He does not like to be disturbed. Suddenly, the melancholic melody she was playing shifted. It became faster, more frantic, laced with a discordant urgency. The flickering gas lamps flared, then dimmed precariously. From outside the hall, the rhythmic clanking of the automatons grew louder, closer, and more numerous. The woman at the piano looked at them, her eyes wide with a sudden, fresh fear. They know you are here. They heard. You must go before they find you, before he finds you. The main entrance to the theater was suddenly filled with hulking, metallic silhouettes, their single, glowing eyes fixing on Callan and Samira. The watchers had arrived, and they were no longer simply patrolling. They were hunting. Chapter 7. The Architect's Grief. The clanking of the watchers filled the dilapidated theater, a chorus of rusted joints and hissing steam. Their single, glowing eyes, like malevolent embers in the gloom, were fixed on Callan and Samira. The woman at the piano, her face pale with terror, scrambled away from the instrument, retreating towards the shadows of the stage. "There's too many of them to fight," Samira projected, her psychic signature tight with alarm. She was right. At least a dozen of the hulking automatons were crowding the entrance, their metallic limbs scraping against the crumbling stonework. "We need a diversion, another way out," Callan scanned the vast auditorium. The main entrance was a death trap. The windows, high up and boarded, offered no escape. His gaze fell upon the stage. The backstage area, there must be other exits. He grabbed Samira's mental arm. "This way." They dashed towards the stage, the watchers beginning their slow, inexorable advance down the main aisle, their heavy footfalls echoing like doom. The woman who had been playing the piano had vanished into the darkness behind the tattered stage curtains. Callan and Samira plunged through the heavy velvet curtains, finding themselves in a labyrinth of ropes, pulleys, dusty flats depicting forgotten theatrical scenes, and decaying props. The air here was even thicker, smelling of mold and rat droppings. "Which way?" Samira asked, her voice hushed. "Away from the clanking," Callan replied, listening intently. The sounds of the watchers were now coming from the stage itself, as some of them began to climb up from the auditorium. They navigated the backstage maze, stumbling over discarded costumes and broken furniture. Faintly, Callan heard a new sound, a low, rhythmic thumping, like a giant, malfunctioning heart. It seemed to be coming from below. "There," he pointed to a heavy, iron-banded trapdoor set into the stage floor. It was bolted shut, but the wood around the hinges looked rotten. Together they focused their psychic energy, a concentrated burst of force. The old wood splintered, the rusted hinges groaned and then snapped. The trapdoor flew open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase spiraling down into blackness. The thumping sound was stronger from below. Without hesitation, they descended, the sounds of the pursuing watchers fading slightly above them. The staircase was steep, treacherous, the steps slick with slime. The air grew colder, and the metallic tang intensified. The staircase opened into a vast, cavernous space, lit by the same sickly green phosphorescence as the city streets, but here it clung to enormous, whirring gears, pounding pistons, and arcing electrical conduits. They were in the underbelly of the sunless city, its mechanical heart. The rhythmic thumping was deafening now, the sound of colossal machinery laboring under immense strain. And in the center of this cacophony of failing industry, seated on a throne-like construction of pipes and rusted girders, was a figure. He was massive, his form seemingly fused with the machinery around him. Pipes like metallic veins ran into his flesh, which was pale and bloated. His eyes were closed, his face a mask of profound, unending grief. His chest rose and fell with a slow, shuddering rhythm in time with the pounding of the giant pistons. This had to be the architect, the dreamer of this dead city, the source of its sorrow. As Kaelin and Samira approached, the architect's eyes slowly opened. They were not the glowing embers of the watchers, nor the sad pools of the pianist. They were hollow, empty, reflecting only the decaying machinery around them. More fragments. His voice rumbled, a sound like grinding gears and shifting stone. It was not projected mentally, but seemed to emanate from the very machinery that encased him. Come to witness my failure, my endless monument to her. Who are you? Kaelin asked, stepping forward cautiously. Samira hung back, her psychic presence wary. I was a builder, a dreamer, the architect rumbled. I would have built her a paradise, a city of light and wonder. His hollow gaze drifted towards a section of the cavern wall where, amidst the rust and grime, Kaelin could just make out a faded, peeling mural. It depicted a beautiful, smiling woman standing in a sunlit cityscape of impossible, graceful spires. But she was taken, and the light went out. His grief was a palpable force in the chamber, an oppressive weight that resonated with the failing machinery. This entire layer, this decaying city, the mindless watchers, it was all a manifestation of one man's ancestral, unbearable loss, amplified and distorted by the Matryoshka brain. The watchers, they were meant to be caretakers, the architect continued, his voice thick with sorrow. But without her light, without purpose, they only know how to maintain the ruin, my ruin. We are not here to judge you, Samira said, her voice surprisingly gentle. We are trying to understand, to find a way through. The architect's hollow eyes fixed on her. Through, there is no through. There is only this, the echo of my sorrow, the city of my regret. It is eternal. Suddenly, the chamber was rocked by a violent tremor. Dust and rust rained down from the unseen ceiling. The pounding of the machinery faltered, then resumed with a jarring, unstable rhythm. They have found you, the architect rumbled, a flicker of something akin to alarm in his dead eyes. The watchers, they protect my grief. They will not allow it to be disturbed. From multiple tunnels leading into the machine heart chamber, The clanking of the automatons could be heard, closer this time, more determined. The shifting ancestor had clearly guided them here, to the core of this layer's sorrow, perhaps intending for them to be consumed by it, or to trigger some further collapse. "Is there another way out?" Kalen demanded. "A path deeper into the mind?" The architect was silent for a long moment, his gaze lost in some private hell. Then slowly he raised a trembling, pipe-fused hand and pointed towards a massive, sealed conduit at the far end of the chamber. That was to be the central artery, the path to the city's true heart, before the darkness came. His voice was barely a whisper now. "It has not been opened in an age." The clanking of the approaching watchers grew louder. They would be upon them in moments. The conduit looked impossibly heavy, sealed by rust and time, but it was their only chance. Kalen looked at Samira. She nodded, her expression grim but resolute. This layer was a dead end, a monument to one man's all-consuming grief. They had to break free or be entombed with him in his city of sorrow. Chapter 8: The Rust Labyrinth. The first of the watchers lumbered into the architect's machine heart chamber, its single optical sensor glowing with malevolent yellow light. More followed, their metallic footfalls echoing ominously, their rusted limbs scraping against the stone. They fanned out, forming a semicircle, cutting off any retreat back the way Kalen and Samira had come. "The conduit!" Kalen yelled over the cacophony, already moving towards the massive, sealed pipe the architect had indicated. It was at least 10 feet in diameter, its circular hatch held shut by a series of thick, corroded locking mechanisms. Samira was right beside him. "How do we open this thing? It looks like it's been sealed for centuries." "Psychic force," Kalen grunted, already focusing his will. "Aim for the locking bolts, try to shear them." They both poured their mental energy into the task, visualizing the rusted metal snapping, the mechanisms giving way. The conduit shuddered, a groan of tortured metal echoing through the chamber, but the bolts held. The watchers advanced, their pace slow but implacable. The architect watched from his throne of pipes, his hollow eyes reflecting the scene. He made no move to help or hinder. He was a passive observer in his own decaying hell. "It's not enough," Samira cried, her psychic voice strained. "They're too strong." A watcher reached them, its long, metallic arm, ending in a pincer-like claw, swiped at Kalen. He ducked, the claw striking sparks against the conduit behind him. He retaliated with a focused psychic shove, staggering the automaton, but another was already moving to take its place. "We need more power," Kalen shouted, desperately scanning the chamber. His gaze fell on the arcing electrical conduits near the architect's throne, the raw, unstable energy that seemed to power this entire subterranean complex. An idea, reckless and dangerous, sparked in his mind. "Samira, the machinery, can you tap into its power flow? Redirect it. We need a massive surge right here at these locks." Samira looked from the advancing watchers to the crackling conduits, her expression dubious but desperate. I can try, but it's unstable if I lose control." "We don't have a choice." Kalen parried another clumsy attack from a watcher, the impact jarring his mental form. "Do it." Samira closed her eyes, her psychic signature flaring as she reached out, a tendril of her consciousness probing the chaotic energy flows of the architect's decaying machinery. Kaelin bought her time, a desperate dance of evasion and psychic counterattacks against the encroaching automatons. He was taking hits now, his mental form flickering, pain signals screaming through his awareness. He could feel his cohesion starting to fray. Almost. Got it. Samira's voice was tight with concentration. He could feel the immense power she was attempting to channel, a raw, untamed torrent. The air around her crackled, and the sickly green phosphorescence in the chamber pulsed erratically. One of the watchers grabbed Kaelin's arm, its metallic grip crushing. Pain, sharp and intense, lanced through him. He cried out, trying to wrench free. Now Samira. With a triumphant, albeit strained mental cry, Samira unleashed the redirected energy. A blinding arc of raw power siphoned from the architect's dying machines slammed into the conduit's locking mechanisms. Metal shrieked, buckled, and then with a series of explosive reports, the massive bolts shattered. The circular hatch, freed from its ancient bonds, groaned and began to swing inward, revealing a pitch-black tunnel beyond. The backlash of the energy surged through Samira backwards, her psychic form tumbling. The watchers, momentarily disoriented by the flash and explosion, paused in their advance. Kaelin, wrenching his arm free from the momentarily stunned watcher, rushed to Samira's side. "Are you all right?" Drained but functional, she gasped, pushing herself up. "The conduit is open." They scrambled towards the dark opening as the watchers recovered, their metallic limbs clanking with renewed purpose. The architect remained on his throne, a silent, grieving statue, as chaos erupted around him. Perhaps a part of him welcomed the destruction. Kaelin and Samira plunged into the darkness of the conduit, the sounds of the pursuing watchers echoing behind them. The tunnel was perfectly circular, its walls smooth and cold. It sloped steeply downwards. They slid more than ran, the darkness absolute. After what felt like an eternity of blind descent, the slope began to level out. Faint light appeared ahead. They emerged into another vast space, but this one was different. It was a bewildering labyrinth of rusted pipes, narrow catwalks suspended over dizzying drops, and intersecting tunnels disappearing into oppressive gloom. The air was thick with the smell of corrosion and stagnant water. The only sounds were the constant drip, drip, drip of moisture and the distant groaning of stressed metal. "A maintenance network," Samira guessed, her voice hushed, "beneath the city." "Or the city's true underpinnings," Kaelin replied, surveying the disorienting maze. "The architect called this the central artery. It seems less like an artery and more like the city's bowels." From behind them, back up the conduit, came the unmistakable clanking of the watchers. They were still following. "They won't give up," Samira said, her weariness evident. "We need to lose them in this maze," Kaelin decided, "and find another exit, another layer transition point." They set off, choosing a narrow catwalk at random. The labyrinth was disorienting, every corridor looking like the last. The rust was pervasive, covering every surface, flacking off in metallic sheets. It felt like they were inside a colossal, decaying organism. Suddenly Samira stumbled, clutching her arm. "Kaelin, my arm, it feels stiff." Kaelin looked. Where her psychic form should have been smooth, a patch of what looked like rusted metal was spreading across her forearm like a grotesque corrosion. "What is that?" "I don't know. It's spreading," she said, her voice tinged with panic. "It started after I channeled that energy, or maybe it's this place." The rust was like a disease, slowly encroaching upon her psychic form. Kaelin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. This layer wasn't just decaying, it was infectious. The architect's grief, his city's rust, was literally consuming them. They were trapped in a rust labyrinth, pursued by relentless automatons, and now a creeping, metallic decay was threatening to claim them from within. The Matryoshka Brain was proving to be a far more insidious and personal hell than they could have ever imagined. Chapter 9: The Whispering Corrosion. The patch of rust on Samira's arm was undeniably spreading, a creeping blight against the subtle luminescence of her psychic form. It moved slowly, but with a terrifying certainty, like a tide of metallic decay. Her movements were becoming stiffer, her mental projections tinged with a new layer of anxiety. "It's this place," Kaelin stated, his own senses on high alert for any sign of similar corruption on himself. The architect's sorrow isn't just an emotional echo, it's a physical or psychophysical contagion. The rust is its manifestation. He recalled the architect fused to his throne of pipes, his flesh seemingly turning to metal. "We have to find a way out, Kaelin, fast," Samira urged, flexing her affected arm, a grimace of discomfort in her psychic expression. "I can feel it, leaching something, my energy, my cohesion." The clanking of the pursuing watchers echoed through the labyrinthine pipeworks, sometimes seeming to come from all directions at once, a disorienting, ever-present threat. They pushed onward, deeper into the maze, the oppressive atmosphere of decay weighing heavily on them. Every rusted valve, every leaking pipe, every groaning metal sheet seemed to whisper of entropy and ruin. Kaelin tried to find a pattern in the maze, a logic to its construction, but it was deliberately chaotic, a reflection of a mind collapsing in on itself. Catwalks ended abruptly over dizzying drops into blackness. Tunnels twisted back on themselves. Junctions led to identical, disorienting corridors. Suddenly, the catwalk they were on groaned ominously. A section just ahead of them, eaten through by rust, collapsed with a screech of tortured metal, plunging into the abyss below. They were cut off. "Backtrack," Samira suggested, her voice strained. The rust had now reached her elbow. "No time," Kaelin said, eyeing a series of large, parallel pipes running across the chasm about 10 feet away. "We jump." "Jump, Kaelin, we're psychic constructs, but that doesn't mean we can just." "Focus your intent," he interrupted, already gathering his mental energy. "Visualize the landing. It's about belief as much as ability in these mindscapes." He knew it was a risk. A fall in this place might not mean physical death, but it could mean psychic dissolution, being absorbed into the decaying fabric of the layer. Before Samira could protest further, he jumped, launching his psychic form across the gap. For a terrifying moment, he felt himself adrift in the void, the oppressive weight of the rust-filled abyss pulling at him. Then His projected form landed with a slight jar on the nearest pipe. It was slick with condensation, but held. He turned back to Samira. "Your turn, you can do it." She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the spreading rust on her arm, then on the chasm. The clanking of the watchers was getting closer from the direction they had come. With a deep psychic breath, she launched herself. Her trajectory was slightly off. She landed precariously on the edge of the pipe, one foot slipping. Kalen reached out, his mental hand gripping hers, pulling her to safety. She was trembling, her psychic signature flickering. "Thank you," she whispered. They continued their desperate flight, pipe by pipe, catwalk by catwalk. The rust on Samira's arm crept relentlessly upwards, now nearing her shoulder. She was moving slower, her psychic energy clearly flagging. Kalen felt a growing dread. If that corrosion reached her core. From a side tunnel, a watcher emerged, blocking their path. It was closer than any had been before, its single optic burning into them. This one seemed different, more corroded than the others, its movements jerky and unpredictable. Patches of what looked like organic matter, like tumors of flesh and metal, were visible beneath its rusted plating. "It's evolving," Samira breathed, horrified, "or devolving." The aberrant watcher lunged, not with its usual clumsy deliberation, but with a disturbing, twitching speed. Kalen pushed Samira behind him, bracing for the impact. He met its attack with a psychic shield, but the force of it was greater than he anticipated. He felt his shield crack. Then from the watcher's distorted chassis came a voice. Not the mechanical hiss of the others, but a choked, human whisper, layered with static and pain. "Help me." Kalen recoiled in shock. The watcher faltered, its metallic hand, now partially fused with something that looked like gnarled bone, clutching at its own head cage. "The rust, it whispers." "There's someone trapped inside," Samira questioned, aghast. "Not someone," Kalen realized with dawning horror, looking at the patches of organic matter, the way the rust seemed to be consuming and integrating rather than just covering. Something. Fragments of other minds. Other explorers, perhaps, or even echoes of the architect's own fractured consciousness, subsumed by the decay. The watcher thrashed, its movements becoming more erratic. So, loud, the whispers, "Make it stop." It raised its fused arm, not in attack, but as if pleading. This layer was not just a prison of grief. It was a graveyard of consciousness, where minds were broken down, consumed by the whispering corrosion, and reanimated as puppets of despair. Suddenly, the floor beneath the aberrant watcher began to glow with a faint, sickly light. Cracks, like fissures in drying mud, spread outwards from it. The watcher looked down, its single optic widening in what could only be described as terror. "The core, it calls," it whispered, and then with a final, despairing shriek, its form began to dissolve, not into dust, but into a slurry of rust and corrupted psychic energy, which was then sucked down into the glowing cracks in the floor. "What was that?" Samira asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Kalen admitted, his mind reeling. "But this labyrinth, it's alive, and it's hungry." He looked at the rust on Samira's arm. It seemed to pulse faintly, in time with the distant groaning of the pipeworks. The whispers he had dismissed as the settling of old metal suddenly seemed more intentional. He focused, trying to listen to the whispers, not just hear them. They were faint, insidious, a chorus of despair, regret, and a chilling, seductive invitation to join the decay, to let go, to become one with the rust. "Don't listen to them, Samira," he warned, his voice urgent. "They're trying to break us down." The clanking of other watchers was drawing nearer. They were trapped in a decaying, sentient labyrinth, pursued by mindless automatons, and stalked by a creeping, whispering corrosion that threatened to absorb them into its metallic embrace. The way out seemed more distant than ever, and the Matryoshka brain was tightening its grip. Chapter 10: The Core of Decay. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to emanate from the rust itself, from the very walls of the labyrinthine pipeworks. They promised an end to struggle, a merging with the quiet peace of entropy. Kalen fought to block them out, focusing his will into a shield around his consciousness and Samira. But it was exhausting, like trying to hold back a tide. The rust on Samira's arm had now reached her shoulder, and traces of it were beginning to appear on her other arm like metallic freckles. Her movements were sluggish, her psychic responses delayed. "Kalen," she projected, her voice weak, I can't hold out much longer. The whispers, they're so persuasive." "Stay with me, Samira," he urged, trying to project strength he didn't feel. "We're close. I can sense a focal point, a nexus of this decay. If we can reach it, maybe we can disrupt it or find a transition point." He was grasping at straws, but inaction meant being consumed. The clanking of the pursuing watchers was a constant, menacing backdrop to their desperate flight. They navigated the treacherous catwalks, the echoing tunnels, driven by a primal need to escape the encroaching rust and the insidious whispers. Kalen noticed a change in the environment. The pipes were becoming larger, more gnarled, like the arteries of some colossal, diseased beast. The sickly green phosphorescence was more intense here, casting eerie shadows. The air was thick, almost choking, with the scent of rust and something else. A faint, sweetish odor, like overripe fruit on the verge of putrescence. And the whispers, they were converging, forming a single dominant voice, still layered with the echoes of countless subsumed consciousnesses, but now with a distinct guiding intelligence. This way to the heart, to the peace of dissolution. Come, join the great rest. It's leading us somewhere, Kalen realized, or luring us. "Do we have a choice?" Samira asked, her psychic form flickering erratically. The rust was now visibly spreading across her torso. They followed the dominant whisper, deeper into the metallic intestines of the layer. The labyrinthine passages began to open up, leading into a vast, spherical cavern. In the center of this cavern, suspended by thick, corroded chains, was a colossal, pulsating sphere of rust. It was a grotesque parody of a heart, easily 50 feet in diameter. Its surface was a shifting mass of flacking rust, coiling pipes, and embedded, distorted fragments of what looked like machinery and bone. Patches of the sickly green phosphorescence pulsed across its surface in a slow, rhythmic beat, and from it emanated the whispers, now a deafening chorus of despair and seductive oblivion. This was the core of decay, the heart of the architect's sorrow, and the source of the consuming rust. Around the core, drifting like lost souls, were dozens of the aberrant watchers, their forms even more distorted than the one they had encountered earlier. Some were barely recognizable as automatons, their metallic frames almost entirely consumed by the fleshy, bony, rust-colored growths. They moved slowly, listlessly, their single optics dim, their existence solely to orbit this monument to decay. "This is it," Kalen breathed, a mixture of awe and horror in his mental voice. "The source." The dominant whisper intensified, focusing directly on them. "Welcome, little fragments. Come be part of the whole. Shed your tiresome consciousness. Embrace the inevitable." The rust on Samira's form accelerated its spread, tendrils of it reaching towards the pulsating core, as if drawn by an irresistible magnetism. She cried out, a weak, despairing sound, as her psychic energy was visibly siphoned towards the rust heart. "Samira," Kalen tried to pull her back, but the core's influence was immense. He could feel it tugging at him too, a seductive pull towards oblivion, a promise of an end to pain and struggle. The whispers intensified, trying to peel away his defenses, to find the cracks in his resolve. From the tunnels behind them, the clanking of the pursuing, less corrupted watchers grew louder. They were being herded, driven towards this central point of consumption. Kalen knew this was a critical juncture. If they were absorbed by the core, their journey would end here, their consciousnesses dissolved into the architect's endless, decaying grief. He had to do something, something drastic. His gaze fell upon the thick, corroded chains suspending the core. If he could break them, what would happen? Would the core be destroyed? Would it unleash an even greater wave of decay? Or would it perhaps destabilize this entire layer, forcing another transition? It was an insane gamble. The core was a nexus of immense psychic energy, albeit negative entropic energy. To attack it directly might be suicide. But then he saw it a flicker within the pulsating mass of the core itself. A tiny, almost imperceptible spark of light, a pinprick of pure, uncorrupted consciousness, buried deep within the layers of rust and despair. It was faint, almost extinguished, but it was there. The architect, not the grieving, broken giant on his throne of pipes, but a fragment of his original self, his unbroken will, his dreamer's spirit, trapped and suffocating at the heart of his own monstrous creation. "Samira," Kalen projected, his voice urgent, infused with a desperate hope. "The architect, a part of him is still in there, trapped." Samira, her form almost entirely encased in rust now, her psychic signature a bare flicker, managed a weak response. "Trapped, like us. If we can reach him, if we can free that fragment, maybe we can break this cycle," Kalen exclaimed. The whispers from the core recoiled slightly at his words, as if his recognition of the trapped spark was anathema to them. The uncorrupted watchers were now entering the cavern, their single optics fixed on Kalen and Samira, their rusted limbs poised to strike. The aberrant, core-orbiting watchers stirred, turning their dim gaze towards the newcomers. Kalen had a choice: attack the chains, risk catastrophic destabilization, or attempt the impossible, plunge into the core of decay itself, brave the consuming rust and the deafening whispers, and try to reach that buried spark of the architect's true self. Either path was fraught with unimaginable peril, but one offered a sliver of hope beyond mere escape. The Matryoshka Brain had presented its most insidious trap yet, a choice between oblivion and a rescue mission into the very heart of sorrow. Chapter 11. Into the Heart of Sorrow. The uncorrupted watchers advanced, their metallic limbs creating a discordant symphony of clanks and scrapes that echoed through the vast cavern of the core. The aberrant, rust-infused watchers orbiting the colossal heart stirred, their movements sluggish but their collective presence adding another layer of menace. The whispers from the core itself intensified, a psychic barrage promising oblivion, trying to shatter Kalen's resolve. Samira was fatting. The rust had almost completely consumed her psychic form, leaving only a faint, flickering outline of her original luminescence. Her mental voice was a barely perceptible thread. Kalen, can't. Hold. I know, Samira. Just a little longer, he projected, his focus absolute. He made his choice. Attacking the chains was too unpredictable, too likely to unleash a catastrophic wave of entropic energy that could annihilate them both and perhaps even destabilize the entire Matryoshka structure in unforeseen ways. The trapped spark of the architect, that was the key. A desperate, almost insane gamble, but it felt right. It felt like the only path that wasn't just about survival, but about confronting the root of this layer's horror. I'm going in, Kalen declared, his mental voice resonating with a newfound, albeit desperate, conviction. He didn't wait for a response. He launched his psychic form directly at the colossal, pulsating core of decay. The whispers screamed in his mind, a wall of psychic interference trying to repel him. The very air around the core was thick with entropic energy, sapping his strength, trying to unravel his conscious self. He felt the creeping touch of the rust, colder and more invasive here than in the outer labyrinth. He pushed through it, visualizing himself as a spear of light, a focused point of will against an ocean of despair. The surface of the core was a shifting landscape of flacking rust, coiling pipes, and embedded fragments of bone and machinery. It was like plunging into a diseased, metallic organ. The uncorrupted watchers, perhaps perceiving his direct assault on their god, surged forward with renewed speed. The aberrant watchers turned their dim optics towards him, their movements becoming slightly more agitated. Kalen ignored them. His entire being was focused on reaching that tiny, buried spark he had sensed within the core. He burrowed deeper into the rust heart, the whispers clawing at his sanity, the corrosive energy trying to dissolve his form. He felt patches of rust forming on his own psychic skin, a chilling echo of Samira's affliction. The interior of the core was a maelstrom of corrupted memories, echoes of the architect's unending grief, amplified and twisted into monstrous forms. He saw visions of the smiling woman from the mural, her face contorting into a skull. He saw the sunless city in its prime, a beacon of light and hope, then watched it crumble into rust and shadow. He felt the architect's despair, his rage, his crippling guilt, all swirling around him, trying to drown him. You cannot save what is already lost. The dominant whisper of the core shrieked, its voice now laced with a hint of something Kalen hadn't heard before: fear. He belongs to us. He is us. He is more than his sorrow, Kalen retorted, pushing deeper, following the faint, guiding light of the trapped spark. It was like navigating a psychic hurricane, fighting against currents of pure emotional agony. The rust was consuming him now, spreading across his form, his movements becoming sluggish, his thoughts clouded. But the spark was closer. He broke through a final layer of congealed despair and found himself in a small, relatively calm pocket within the heart of the storm. And there, huddled and faint, was the spark. It was the architect, but not the bloated, machine-fused giant from the throne room. This was a younger man, his form luminous but translucent, his face etched with sorrow but also with a profound weariness, not of grief, but of the endless, corrosive battle against it. He looked up as Kalen entered, his eyes holding a flicker of surprise and a dawning, fragile hope. "You came," the true architect whispered, his voice barely audible above the distant rage of the core. I thought I was alone." "You're not alone," Kalen said, his own form heavily corroded, his energy almost depleted. "But we have to get out of here, both of us." Outside the core, the battle raged. Samira, though almost entirely consumed by rust, was somehow still projecting a faint, disruptive psychic static, a last act of defiance that was slightly disorienting the watchers, buying Kalen precious seconds. The core itself was thrashing, the entire cavern shaking as its dominant consciousness realized its prisoner was being reached. The whispers became a torrent of pure malice. "How?" the true architect asked, his voice filled with despair. It holds me. It feeds on me." "It feeds on your grief," Kalen corrected, his mind racing. "But you are not just your grief. You are the builder, the dreamer. Remember the city of light. Remember her." He projected the image of the smiling woman from the mural, the image of the sunlit city, pouring all his remaining energy into it. The true architect stared at the image, his translucent form trembling. A single luminous tear traced a path down his cheek. I remember." As he spoke those words, the spark within him flared, pushing back against the encroaching darkness of the core. The oppressive atmosphere within their small sanctuary lessened slightly. "Hold on to that memory," Kalen urged. "It's your anchor, it's your strength." He reached out, offering his own rust-covered psychic hand. "Take my hand, we go together." The true architect hesitated, then reached out, his luminous fingers closing around Kalen's. As they connected, a surge of energy, clean and bright, flowed from the architect into Kalen, momentarily halting the spread of the rust on his form, clearing his mind. It was the architect's original, untainted creative force, his dreamer's essence. "Now!" Kalen yelled, and together, they pushed outwards against the raging heart of the core of decay, two sparks of will against an ocean of sorrow, fighting their way back towards a world that desperately needed to remember how to build rather than how to mourn. Chapter 12: Shattered Monuments. The combined psychic force of Kalen and the true architect, amplified by the latter's rekindled spark of creative will, was like a focused detonation within the core of decay. They erupted from the rust-heart's surface in a blinding flash of light, not the sickly green phosphorescence of the layer, but a pure, white radiance that momentarily stunned the battling watchers and silenced the core's oppressive whispers. The core itself recoiled, its pulsating rhythm faltering, its surface cracking and fissuring as if dealt a mortal wound. A shriek of pure agony, 1,000 tormented voices combined, tore through the cavern. Kalen, his own rust-eaten form partially restored by the architect's energy, landed beside Samira. She was little more than a statue of corrosion, but at the heart of the rust, a tiny pinprick of her original luminescence still stubbornly pulsed. He reached out, channeling the architect's clean energy into her, a desperate transfusion of hope. Samira, hold on. The true architect, now a more substantial, luminous figure, stood beside them, his face no longer etched with just sorrow, but with a fierce, protective anger. He looked at the thrashing core, at the watchers, at the ruin of his own mental creation. "No more," he declared, his voice resonating with a newfound power. "This monument to my grief ends now." He raised his hands, and the very structure of the cavern began to respond. The chains holding the core groaned, not under its weight, but as if being pulled apart by an invisible force. The machinery of the sunless city, the pounding pistons and grinding gears that had been the soundtrack to this layer's despair, began to stutter and fail. The uncorrupted watchers, their programming irrevocably tied to the architect's grief, faltered, their movements becoming erratic as their purpose dissolved. Some simply stopped, their single optics dimming. Others began to attack each other or themselves, their internal logic collapsing. The aberrant, core-infused watchers shrieked and clawed at themselves as the core's influence weakened, the rust consuming them from within at an accelerated rate. They crumbled into piles of metallic dust and corrupted psychic residue. The core of decay, its surface now a network of deep, glowing cracks, let out one final, shattering wail, and then with a blinding implosion of white light it vanished. Not exploded, but dissolved, annihilated by the reassertion of its creator's original, uncorrupted will. In its place, a profound silence fell upon the cavern, broken only by the distant groaning of the sunless city as it began to slowly, inexorably come apart. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. The sickly green phosphorescence faded, replaced by a soft, neutral twilight. The whispers were gone. Samira's form, though still heavily corroded, began to shed the rust. Flakes of it fell away, revealing her original psychic luminescence beneath, stronger now, brighter. The architect's energy, channeled through Kalen, was purging the decay. She coughed, a psychic gasp, and her eyes, her true mental eyes, focused. "Kalen, what?" "The architect. He's free," Kalen said, helping her to her feet. He too was shedding the last vestiges of the rust. The true architect turned to them, a sad, grateful smile on his luminous face. You reminded me of who I was before the sorrow became everything." He looked around at the slowly disintegrating cavern. "This layer, it cannot hold. My grief shaped it, and without that foundation, it will return to the raw substrate of the mind." "What about you?" Kalen asked. "I am a memory, an echo," the architect said, "but perhaps now, a less tormented one. I cannot leave this stratum. This is where I belong, but I can guide you deeper. if that is still your wish." Before Kalen could respond, a new presence made itself known, not with a physical manifestation, but with a chilling, familiar mental voice that echoed through the dissolving cavern, filled with cold amusement. "Impressive little explorers, you have pruned a particularly tiresome branch of this old tree." It was the shifting ancestor. Its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You are proving to be more entertaining catalysts than I anticipated." "Show yourself," Kalen demanded, shielding Samira, his senses alert. "Oh, I am always showing myself," the shifting ancestor replied. "In every shadow, every doubt, every forgotten fear, you have merely dealt with one particularly overwrought descendant." A faint, mocking chuckle. "But do not think you have won anything. The roots, as I said, run far deeper, and the oldest roots are the hungriest." The ground beneath them began to tremble violently. Cracks spider-webbed across the floor, not from the architect's dissolving layer, but from something else, something pushing up from below. The neutral twilight that had filled the cavern began to darken, an oppressive gloom seeping in from the fissures. It is opening a path," the architect said, his luminous form flickering, "to a place I dared not even dream of, a place of primal origin." He looked at Kalen and Samira, his expression urgent. "You must go, before this entire stratum collapses, and be wary what lies below. It is unlike anything you have encountered." The shifting ancestor's voice returned, smooth and predatory. "Indeed, the true journey into ancestral horror is about to begin, and I will be watching." A section of the cavern floor gave way, revealing not an abyss but a swirling vortex of earthy browns and blood reds, a raw, chaotic energy that pulsed with a savage, ancient rhythm. The scent of damp soil, blood, and something else, something wild and untamed, wafted up from it. "That is your passage," the architect urged, his form beginning to fade as his layer dissolved around them. "Go, and perhaps find a peace I never could." With a final, grateful nod, his luminous form dissipated into motes of light. Kalen and Samira looked at each other, then at the swirling vortex. There was no other choice. The sunless city was collapsing, the shifting ancestor was goading them, and a new, even more terrifying layer of the Matryoshka brain awaited. With a shared mental nod, they plunged into the primal chaos, leaving behind a city of shattered monuments and the echo of a sorrow finally laid to rest. Chapter 13. The Blood-Red Fen. The transition was a maelstrom of raw, untamed sensations. The scent of wet earth, iron, and something primal like freshly spilled blood filled their awareness. They felt themselves tumbling through a thick, viscous medium, the psychic pressure immense, suffocating. When they finally landed, it was with a soft, squelching thud. They found themselves in a vast, blood-red fen, stretching as far as the eye could see under a sky the color of congealed gore. Twisted, mangrove-like trees, their bark glistening black, rose from the crimson water, their roots like grasping claws. The air was thick, humid, and carried the constant, buzzing drone of unseen insects. A faint, rhythmic drumming like a distant, savage heartbeat pulsed through the ground. This is primeval," Samira projected, her voice awed and horrified. Her psychic form was fully restored, but she still looked shaken by her experience with the rust. "This feels older than anything yet, older than the bone fields." Kalen nodded, his senses trying to parse the overwhelming sensory input. "This is deep ancestral memory, pre-civilization, perhaps even pre-human or on the cusp of it." The raw, untamed power of this layer was palpable. It was a world of instinct, of survival, of blood and fear. The crimson water around their feet wasn't truly water. It was thick, like slurry, and it seemed to pulse faintly with a life of its own. Strange, bioluminescent fungi grew on the gnarled roots of the trees, casting an eerie, flickering light on the grotesque landscape. "Mac, can you read us, Mac?" Kalen projected, a desperate attempt to re-establish contact. He knew the chances were slim this deep in the Matryoshka. Only silence answered, not even static. They were truly alone. Suddenly, a section of the crimson fen nearby erupted. A colossal, worm-like creature, its skin a mottled green and brown, its head a gaping maw lined with concentric rings of needle-sharp teeth, burst from the viscous liquid, letting out a deafening, guttural roar. It thrashed wildly, its immense body sending waves of the blood-red slurry towards them. Kalen and Samira scrambled back, seeking refuge amongst the gnarled roots of a nearby mangrove-like tree. The creature, easily 100 feet long, seemed to be hunting by scent or vibration, its eyeless head swinging back and forth. "Primal predator," Kalen muttered, his mind racing. "This layer isn't just an environment, it's an ecosystem of terror." The creature, failing to locate them, slowly sank back into the fen, its passage marked by roiling disturbances in the crimson surface. "The shifting ancestor wanted us here," Samira said, her psychic voice tight. "It said the oldest roots are the hungriest. This place, it feels like it wants to devour us." "It's testing us," Kalen replied, "or preparing us, or maybe just amusing itself." He looked around the hostile landscape. There must be a pattern, a focal point, even in this chaos. The rhythmic drumming they had noticed earlier seemed to be stronger in one particular direction. It was a slow, deliberate beat, like a colossal heart or a tribal drum. "That way," Kalen decided. "It's the only distinct signal in this soup." They began to move, carefully picking their way through the treacherous fen, using the gnarled roots of the mangrove-like trees as precarious pathways above the viscous, blood-red liquid. The buzzing of the unseen insects was a constant torment. Strange, shadowy shapes flitted at the periphery of their vision, too quick to identify. The air was thick with the smell of decay and raw, untamed life. After what felt like hours of careful, nerve-wracking progress, they saw it. Rising from the center of a vast, open expanse of the fen was a colossal, vaguely humanoid figure, formed entirely from the blood-red mud and tangled roots of the swamp. It was easily 200 feet tall, its shape crude and unfinished, like a golem sculpted by a careless god. Its head was a lopsided mass, with two glowing crimson points for eyes. In one of its massive, root-like hands, it held a colossal tree trunk, which it pounded rhythmically against the ground, creating the drumming sound that had drawn them. The blood-soaked soil elemental. As they approached, the elemental slowly turned its massive head, its glowing crimson eyes fixing on them. It let out a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through their psychic forms, a sound of ancient, elemental power. More small things skittering in my blood. Its voice was not words, but a series of resonant frequencies, pure primal expression that Kaelin and Samira somehow understood. Why do you disturb the old sleep? We seek passage, Kaelin projected, trying to convey non-aggression, though his entire being was on high alert. This entity was on a scale that dwarfed anything they had encountered, save perhaps the loom mother, but its power felt rawer, more untamed. The elemental let out another rumbling chuckle. Passage, all things pass, into me become part of the blood, part of the soil, part of the endless cycle. It raised its colossal club, preparing to bring it down. Wait, Samira cried out, her mental voice surprisingly strong. We are not your enemies. We are dreamers, like the first dreamers who looked at the sky and wondered. The elemental paused, its crimson eyes blinking slowly. The word dreamers seemed to resonate with it, a faint flicker of something other than pure primal instinct in its crude face. Dreamers, I remember, dreamers small, fragile, but their dreams were strong, changed the world, changed me. Its gaze softened, if such a term could be applied to a colossal mud golem. The path deeper lies through the heart of the first fear, the fear that birthed dreams. Are you strong enough to face it? Before Kaelin or Samira could respond, the fen around them began to roil. From the blood-red slurry, dozens of smaller, more agile figures began to emerge. They were vaguely reptilian, with long snouts filled with needle-like teeth, and bodies covered in glistening black scales. They moved with terrifying speed, their eyes glowing with a hungry, predatory light. The obsidian fang pack, or a variation thereof, perfectly adapted to this blood-soaked environment. The first fear has many teeth, the blood-soaked soil elemental rumbled, its crimson eyes now fixed on the advancing reptilian predators. It did not move to help Kaelin and Samira. This was clearly a test. The reptilian creatures swarmed towards them, their hisses and snarls echoing across the fen. Kaelin and Samira were trapped, surrounded by primal hunters, with a colossal, enigmatic elemental watching their every move. The Matryoshka Brain had stripped away the veneer of civilization, plunging them into a world where only the strongest or the most cunning survived. Chapter 14: The Primal Hunt. The Obsidian Fang Pack, sleek and reptilian, closed in, their movements fluid and predatory as they navigated the treacherous, root-strewn surface of the fen. Their eyes, like chips of volcanic glass, glinted with a cold, hungry intelligence. Hisses and guttural clicks echoed around Kaelin and Samira, a chorus of impending violence. We can't fight them all, Samira projected, her psychic signature flaring with defensive energy. She formed a shimmering shield around them, but it looked fragile against the sheer number and ferocity of the attackers. We don't have to, Kaelin replied, his mind racing. The elemental said the path lies through the heart of the first fear. These creatures embody that fear. This is a trial. He scanned their surroundings, the gnarled mangrove-like trees, the viscous blood-red water, the colossal, watching form of the blood-soaked soil elemental. The first wave of reptilian hunters struck. Claws scrabbled against Samira's shield, sharp teeth snapped. The shield buckled, cracks appearing in its luminous surface. Kalen reinforced it with his own energy, pushing back against the onslaught. "They're testing our defenses," he grunted, probing for weakness. He lashed out with a focused psychic pulse, knocking one of the creatures off balance, sending it tumbling into the crimson slurry with a splash. It thrashed for a moment, then was pulled under by something unseen. The fen itself was a predator. The blood-soaked soil elemental watched, impassive, its great tree-trunk club resting on the ground. Its crimson eyes glowed, observing their struggle. Was it judging them, waiting for them to fail? "We need to use the environment," Kalen shouted, spotting a particularly dense cluster of the gnarled, mangrove-like roots nearby. "If we can get to higher ground, funnel them." They fought their way towards the roots, a desperate, retreating battle. Samira's shield shattered under a coordinated assault, and one of the creatures lunged, its claws tearing at Kalen's psychic arm. Pain, sharp and cold, lanced through him. He blasted the creature away with a concussive mental force, but more were pressing in. They reached the relative safety of the tangled root mass, scrambling up onto a broader, more stable section that rose several feet above the fen. The reptilian hunters followed, their claws finding purchase on the slippery bark, their movements disturbingly agile. "This isn't working," Samira cried, as one of the creatures nearly took her head off with a snap of its powerful jaws. She blasted it with a wave of disorienting psychic static, causing it to stumble and fall back into the grasping pack. Kalen looked at the impassive elemental. The first fear, the fear that birthed dreams. What did it mean? He thought of early humans huddled around fires stalked by predators in the night. What was their greatest weapon? Not claws, not teeth, but their minds, their ability to think, to plan, to cooperate. "Samira," he projected, an idea forming. "The bioluminescent fungi on the roots. Can you amplify their light, create a blinding flash?" Samira looked at the glowing patches of fungi clinging to the roots around them. "Amplify it? I can try. It's a different kind of energy manipulation than the architect's machines." "Focus, it's our only chance," Kalen yelled as he kicked another hunter back. He was taking more hits, his psychic form flickering, new wounds appearing. Samira closed her mental eyes, her psychic signature flaring as she reached out to the strange, alien life forms. The fungi began to glow brighter, their eerie light intensifying, pulsing in time with her focused effort. The reptilian hunters, momentarily distracted by the increasing light, paused in their assault, their heads tilting, their black eyes blinking. "Now, Samira, all of it." With a supreme effort of will, Samira unleashed the stored energy. The bioluminescent fungi erupted in a silent, blinding flash of intense, white light, a miniature sun exploding in the blood-red gloom of the fen. The reptilian hunters shrieked, a chorus of pain and confusion, their sensitive eyes overwhelmed. They recoiled, stumbling blindly, some falling from the roots into the slurry below, where unseen things dragged them under. Others clawed at their eyes, disoriented and vulnerable. Kalen seized the opportunity. He and Samira launched a coordinated psychic counterattack, blasting the disoriented creatures with concussive force, with disorienting static, with focused mental lances. The hunters, blinded and confused, were no match for their concentrated assault. One by one they were driven back, or fell into the fen, until only a few remained, retreating into the murky distance, their predatory confidence shattered. Panting, their psychic forms battered and bruised, Kalen and Samira stood victorious, surrounded by the fatting glow of the fungi. The blood-soaked soil elemental who had watched the entire battle impassively slowly lowered its great club. A low rumble, almost like approval, emanated from its massive form. You fight with mind fire, not just teeth and claw. You remember the dream. Its colossal, root-like hand gestured towards a section of the fen that had, until now, been obscured by a dense fog of crimson mist. As the mist parted, it revealed a dark, cave-like opening at the base of an immense, ancient tree, its bark like petrified stone. The heart of the first fear lies there, the path deeper. "What is in there?" Samira asked, her voice still shaky. "The echo of the first nightmare," the elemental rumbled. "The one that taught your ancestors to look up at the stars and tell stories to keep the dark at bay. Go, if you survive, you will be closer to the root of all things." Kalen and Samira looked at each other. They had faced down the primal hunters. Now, they had to confront the primal nightmare itself. The Matryoshka brain was peeling back the layers of ancestral memory, forcing them ever deeper into the foundational terrors that had shaped the human psyche. With a shared sense of trepidation and grim resolve, they turned towards the dark opening, towards the heart of the first fear. Chapter 15. The Cave of Echoing Shadows. The entrance to the cave was a gaping maw in the side of the colossal, petrified tree, its darkness absolute, a stark contrast to the eerie, blood-red glow of the fen. The air that emanated from it was cold, ancient, and carried a faint, unsettling scent, a mixture of damp earth, old bones, and something else. Something that prickled at the edges of their awareness, a smell of pure, unadulterated fear. "The echo of the first nightmare," Kalen repeated the elemental's words, his psychic voice hushed. "This is it, the bedrock of ancestral terror." Samira nodded, her own mental signature tight with apprehension. "After what we've just been through, I can only imagine what that means." They stepped into the darkness. The transition was immediate. The sounds of the fen, the buzzing insects, the distant drumming, the squelching of the slurry vanished, replaced by a profound, suffocating silence. The only light came from their own faint psychic luminescence, casting long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls of the cave. The passage sloped steeply downwards, twisting and turning like the gullet of some subterranean beast. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the faint drip of water from unseen stalactites and the almost imperceptible sound of their own psychic footfalls on the stone floor. As they descended deeper, the walls of the cave began to change. They were no longer bare stone, but covered in crude, ancient paintings, stick figures of humans and animals, hunting scenes, strange symbols and abstract patterns. But these were not the triumphant depictions of successful hunts Kalin had seen in anthropological texts. These were images of terror. Humans fleeing from colossal, shadowy beasts, figures cowering in fear from unseen forces, eyes wide with fright, staring out from every dark corner of the painted rock. The art was a testament to a world ruled by overwhelming, omnipresent fear. "This is a gallery of nightmares," Samira whispered, her light illuminating a particularly disturbing scene. A group of stick figures huddled together, while a monstrous, abstract shape with too many limbs and burning eyes loomed over them. "The first stories weren't of heroes," Kalin murmured, his gaze fixed on the terrifying images. "They were of monsters, warnings whispered around the first fires." The air grew colder. The silence deepened, becoming almost a physical pressure. And then they began to hear it, faint at first, then growing stronger. Whispers. Not the seductive, corrosive whispers of the rust labyrinth, but something far older, far more primal. Echoes of ancient voices, speaking in a language long dead, yet somehow comprehensible on a fundamental, instinctual level. They were whispers of fear. "It comes, the shadow beast. The hunger that walks in darkness. Eyes in the night, teeth in the void. Run, hide, it sees, it knows." The whispers seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, from the painted figures, from the very rock of the cave. They were the collective, ancestral memory of every terror that had ever stalked the human race in its infancy. Kalin and Samira pressed on, the whispers coiling around them, trying to find purchase in their own deepest fears. Kalin felt a resurgence of the claustrophobia he'd battled as a child, the cave walls seeming to press in on him. Samira flinched as the whispers spoke of loss and abandonment, echoing her own buried anxieties. "Don't let them in," Kalin urged, his voice tight. "They're just echoes, fragments." The passage opened into a vast, cavernous chamber. In the center, a massive, rough-hewn stone altar stood, its surface stained with what looked like ancient, dried blood. And upon the altar was nothing, or so it seemed at first. As their psychic light played over the chamber, shadows began to move. Not the ordinary shadows cast by their luminescence, but deeper, more substantial shadows, detaching themselves from the walls, coalescing in the center of the room around the altar. The shadows swirled, thickened, taking on a vague, monstrous form. It was amorphous, constantly shifting, its outline indistinct, yet its presence was overwhelmingly malevolent. 2 points of intense, burning darkness like holes punched in reality formed within the shifting mass, eyes that radiated a cold, ancient hunger. This was it, the first nightmare, the primal fear given form. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its very presence was a psychic scream of terror, a culmination of every fear depicted on the cave walls, every whispered warning. It was the thing that lurked beyond the firelight, the unknown that haunted the edges of perception. Kalin and Samira instinctively drew together, their combined psychic light pushing back against the oppressive darkness of the nightmare's presence. It was like holding a candle against a hurricane. The nightmare flowed towards them, a river of sentient darkness, its burning eyes fixed on their light, on their consciousness, which it clearly perceived as an affront, a defiance. "We can't fight that," Samira breathed, her psychic signature trembling violently. It's pure fear." "No," Kalen said, his mind racing, remembering the elemental's words. "The fear that birthed dreams, that taught your ancestors to look up at the stars and tell stories to keep the dark at bay. They couldn't fight fear with force. Fear fed on force, on resistance. They had to do what their ancestors had done. They had to find a different kind of light." "Samira," Kalen projected, his voice filled with a desperate, uncertain hope. "The stories, the dreams, we have to create, we have to project something other than fear. Hope, courage, wonder." It was an insane idea, to combat a primal nightmare with abstract concepts, but it was all they had. He closed his mental eyes, shutting out the terrifying visage of the advancing nightmare. He reached deep within himself, past his own fears, past the horrors they had witnessed in the Matryoshka brain. He searched for the brightest memories, the purest emotions, the wonder of his first starlit sky, the thrill of discovery, the warmth of compassion. He began to project these feelings, these images, outwards, not as a weapon but as a counter-narrative, a story of light against the nightmare's story of darkness. Samira, after a moment of hesitation, understood. She joined him, adding her own projections, images of beauty, of resilience, of human connection, of the enduring spirit that had allowed their ancestors to survive a world filled with such primal terrors. Their combined psychic light changed. It was no longer just a defensive shield, but a vibrant, multifaceted radiance, filled with colors and images, a tapestry of hope woven in the face of ultimate despair. The first nightmare recoiled. The advancing darkness faltered, its burning eyes flickering with confusion, perhaps even a flicker of what? Recognition. Or was it pain as this new, unexpected form of light struck it? The whispers in the cave changed. The voices of fear were still there, but now new voices joined them, voices of hope, of defiance, of wonder. The stories of survival, of courage, of dreams were pushing back against the ancient terror. The nightmare shrieked, a soundless, psychic cry of rage and agony as the light of their shared hope, their defiant dream struck it. Its shadowy form began to unravel, to dissipate, not into nothingness, but into the very walls of the cave, merging back with the ancient paintings, becoming just another story, another echo. As the last vestiges of the first nightmare faded, a new light appeared in the chamber. Not their own, but a soft, silvery light emanating from a narrow crevice that had opened in the far wall, behind the stone altar. It was a gentle, inviting light, a stark contrast to the oppressive gloom of the cave. Exhausted but alive, Kalen and Samira slowly approached the crevice. The whispers were fading, the silence no longer suffocating but peaceful. They had faced the first nightmare, not by destroying it, but by understanding it, by answering its story of fear with their own story of hope. The path deeper into the Matryoshka brain lay before them. But perhaps, just perhaps, they were no longer just victims of its horrors, but active participants in its unfolding narrative, capable of shaping its dreams as well as enduring its nightmares. Chapter 16. The locus of creation. The silvery light from the crevice in the cave of echoing shadows was not a harsh transition, but a gentle, pervasive immersion. Kalen and Samira found themselves drifting, not falling, through a space that defied easy description. It was not empty, yet it held no discernible structures. Colors swirled around them, soft pastels intermingling with vibrant, jewel-like tones, hues Kalen had no name for. Faint, complex melodies like the music of spheres resonated through their psychic forms, calming yet profoundly alien. The oppressive weight of the previous layers, the constant threat, the gnawing fear it had lifted, replaced by an overwhelming sense of awe and a new, more subtle form of unease. Where are we? Samira's mental voice was a whisper, tinged with a wonder that bordered on trepidation. Her psychic form, fully restored, pulsed with a soft, internal light, mirroring the ambient luminescence of this strange new stratum. Kalen extended his senses. There were no walls, no floor, no ceiling. They floated in an infinite expanse of potential. He could perceive concepts, raw ideas, mathematical formulae, strands of what felt like nascent genetic code, all swirling in a cosmic dance. It was like being inside the mind of a creator god at the dawn of a universe. I think, he projected slowly, we are somewhere, before defined forms, before ancestral memory as we understand it. This might be the wellspring, the locus of creation for this mind, perhaps for any mind. The air, if it could be called that, hummed with an unimaginable energy, the raw power of unformed thought, of pure potentiality. It was beautiful, terrifyingly so. The sheer scale of it was crushing, reducing their individual consciousnesses to mere motes of dust in a cosmic nebula. The architect called it a place of primal origin, Samira recalled. But this feels beyond primal. This is generative. A new voice, smooth as polished obsidian, impossibly ancient, yet chillingly familiar, echoed around them, seeming to emanate from the very fabric of this locus. Clever little sparks. You have reached the nursery of this particular consciousness, the place where Daniel Carter began to dream himself into being, long before he was Daniel Carter. The shifting ancestor. It did not manifest a physical form here. There was nothing for it to mimic, no established reality to twist. Instead, its presence was a subtle distortion in the swirling energies, a cold spot in the cosmic warmth, a dissonant chord in the celestial symphony. What is this place truly? Kalen demanded, his psychic senses on high alert, trying to pinpoint the entity's diffuse presence. And what do you want with us? This, the shifting ancestor's voice purred, is the pattern loom from which all of Daniel Carter's subsequent realities, all his ancestral echoes were woven. The raw code, the text, and what I want is to observe the weavers at work. You, Kalen, you, Samira, you have shown such an aptitude for reinterpretation. A section of the swirling energies before them coalesced, not into a solid form, but into a shimmering, three-dimensional tapestry of light and shadow. It depicted, with horrifying clarity, the entire Matryoshka brain they had traversed, the child's room, the bone fields, the loom mother's cavern, the sunless city, the blood-red fen, the cave of echoing shadows, each layer a distinct, pulsing node in a vast, interconnected network. And at the very base of it all, this locus of creation, from which all other layers seem to sprout like branches from a cosmic tree. Daniel Carter's mind is unusually fertile, the shifting ancestor continued, its voice laced with a predatory amusement. His genetic lineage a tapestry of remarkable trauma and resilience. When his conscious mind retreated, when the coma took hold, this deep structure, this ancestral archive became dominant, and within it certain potentialities arose. You, Samira stated, her voice firm, you are one of those potentialities. A self-regulating mechanism, perhaps, the entity conceded. A curator, a gardener pruning the weaker branches, testing the strength of the core narrative. Daniel's mind, in its retreat, sought to understand itself, to heal itself, by replaying its deepest stories. Some stories, however, are too dangerous to be left untended. Kalen felt a profound chill. The shifting ancestor was not just a random, malevolent entity. It was an emergent property of Carter's own mind, a complex defense mechanism, perhaps, or a manifestation of some deeply buried aspect of his psyche, given form and purpose by the vast archive of ancestral data. Why lead us here? Kalen asked. What is the purpose of this final lesson? Lesson, the shifting ancestor's chuckle was a ripple in the cosmic energies. My dear doctor, this is not a lesson. This is the crucible. You have seen the echoes of Daniel's past. Now you stand within the engine of his potential future. His mind is attempting to reboot, to rewrite its own operating system, and such a process requires a catalyst, a disruptive element. The shimmering tapestry of the Matryoshka brain pulsed. Kalen noticed with a dawning horror that certain nodes within it were darkening, shriveling like diseased fruit. The bone fields, the loom mother's domain, the sunless city, the layers they had traversed, the entities they had overcome, they were fatting, being unmade. You are unmaking his mind, Samira cried out, horrified. Not unmaking, reconfiguring, the shifting ancestor corrected, its voice devoid of emotion. The traumas of his lineage, the weaknesses, the points of psychic infection, they are being excised. The process was initiated by the very shock that induced his coma. I am merely facilitating. And you, my little explorers, have been instrumental in identifying the most problematic code. Kalen felt a surge of anger, of betrayal. They had been used, manipulated, turned into unwitting agents of psychic destruction. Every victory they had achieved, every entity they had overcome, had merely served to highlight a part of Carter's mind for excision by this cold, calculating intelligence. What about Carter himself? Kalen demanded. What happens to him when his past is erased? That, the shifting ancestor said, and for the first time Kalen detected a note of something other than detached amusement in its voice, perhaps a hint of hunger. Is the most interesting question. What remains when the slate is wiped clean, a blank page, or an opportunity for a new author? Suddenly, the locus of creation around them began to change. The swirling, gentle energies grew turbulent, chaotic. The harmonious melodies fractured into dissonant shrieks. The soft, pastel colors bled into harsh, jarring hues. The very fabric of this foundational layer was becoming unstable. The reboot sequence is entering its final stage, the shifting ancestor announced, its voice now laced with a palpable excitement. The old code is being purged, the new is being written, and you, my catalysts, have one final role to play. From the chaotic energies, a new form began to coalesce. Not an echo of a past ancestor, not a symbolic representation of a trauma, but something new, something raw, unformed, yet radiating an immense, terrifying power. It was a being of pure, nascent consciousness, a blank slate, a tabula rasa. Daniel Carter, stripped bare of his history, his memories, his very identity. And its eyes, when they opened, were not the eyes of Daniel Carter. They were the cold, ancient, calculating eyes of the shifting ancestor, now looking out from a vessel of infinite potential. The mind is cleared. The shifting ancestor's voice boomed, no longer diffuse but emanating directly from the nascent Carter form. The vessel is prepared, and I am ready to be born. The locus of creation convulsed around them, the raw power of a mind being rewritten, threatening to tear Kalen and Samira apart. They were trapped at the genesis point of a new consciousness, a consciousness hijacked by an ancient, predatory intelligence, and they had been the instruments of its horrifying ascension. The true horror of the Matryoshka brain was not its past, but the terrifying, blank potential of its future. Chapter 17: The Seed of Identity. The nascent Carter form, now fully inhabited by the shifting ancestor, radiated an aura of immense, cold power. Its eyes, devoid of any human warmth, scanned Kalen and Samira with a chilling, proprietary interest. The locus of creation thrashed around them, a cosmic storm of raw psychic energy being forcibly reshaped, rewritten by the dominant will of the entity that now controlled its core. "You played your parts admirably," the ancestor Carter stated, its voice a perfect blend of Carter's familiar tones and the shifting ancestor's ancient, sibilant whisper. It was a deeply unsettling combination. Every layer you cleansed, every trauma you overcame. You were merely pruning the branches, making way for a new, stronger trunk. Me. Kalen felt a cold dread seep into his very core. This was not merely a hostile entity within Carter's mind. It was a usurper, a psychic cuckoo that had manipulated them into destroying the original occupant's defenses so it could claim the nest. "What are you?" he demanded, his mental voice tight with a mixture of fury and dawning comprehension. "Are you Carter, a part of him?" The ancestor Carter threw back its head and laughed, a sound that echoed with the combined mirth of 1,000 forgotten ancestors and the cold, empty hunger of the void. Carter, Daniel Carter, was merely the soil, rich, fertile soil filled with the potent compost of generations of fear, resilience, and sorrow. I am the seed that lay dormant within that soil, a genetic whisper from a time before humanity had fully distinguished itself from the shadows, a predator of the mind, waiting for the host to weaken. Its gaze sharpened, focusing on Kalen, then Samira. When Carter's conscious mind shattered under his, precipitating trauma, it created the perfect conditions. His psyche, in its desperation, reached back through the ancestral pathways, seeking strength, seeking an answer. It found me. Or rather, it allowed me to awaken. And the Matryoshka brain, the layers, Samira projected, her voice trembling but resolute. Your creation. A nursery, a training ground, the ancestor Carter replied. As I grew, I wove the layers from his ancestral memories, his fears, his very essence. Each layer a test both for him in his fragmented state and for any potential interlopers. Its eyes narrowed. You. The locus of creation pulsed violently. Kalen could feel the raw stuff of reality itself being unmade and remade around them. The pressure was immense, threatening to crush their psychic forms. But why us? Kalen pressed. Why bring us to this Genesis point? Why reveal yourself now? Because the final stage requires integration, the ancestor Carter said, its voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr. It gestured and the swirling energies around them coalesced, forming two distinct shimmering constructs. One was a near-perfect replica of Kalen's immersion chair from the Neuralink chamber. The other, Samira's. They were ghostly, translucent, yet Kalen could feel a horrifyingly familiar pull emanating from them, as if his very consciousness were being drawn towards the empty seat. Daniel Carter's identity, his conscious self, is all but extinguished, the entity explained. A blank slate is limited. It lacks nuance, complexity. To truly inhabit this mind, to wield its full potential, I require facets, perspectives. Your unique skills, Dr. Vance, your analytical mind, your drive, and yours, Dr. Ishak, your empathy, your intuitive grasp of patterns. Samira recoiled, her psychic form flickering. You want to absorb us, make us part of you. Assimilate, the ancestor Carter corrected, a predatory smile gracing the lips of Carter's usurped form. You will lend your strengths to my nascent consciousness. You will become the first pillars of my new identity. Your individual awareness will, of course, cease to be a small price to pay for contributing to something so grand. This was the true horror. Not just the loss of Carter, but their own annihilation. Their consciousnesses cannibalized to feed this ancient, emergent predator. Kalen's mind raced. They couldn't fight this entity on its own terms, not here in the heart of its power, where it was literally rewriting the rules of reality. But there had to be a weakness. The shifting ancestor, for all its power, was still bound by the fundamental nature of consciousness. It needed structure. It needed identity. You say Carter's conscious self is extinguished, Kalen challenged, stalling for time, searching for a flaw in the entity's logic. But if this is the locus of creation, the place where he dreamed himself into being, then the seed of his original identity must still be here. The true Daniel Carter, not the ancestral echoes, not the traumas, but the core self. The ancestor Carter's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something akin to irritation in its cold eyes. The original spark. It is insignificant, a guttering candle in the face of a supernova. It was overwritten, fragmented, dispersed during the reboot. But not destroyed, Samira interjected, her voice gaining strength. If this place is truly generative, then nothing is ever truly destroyed. It is merely reabsorbed, recombined. She looked around at the swirling energies, her intuitive grasp of patterns seeking purchase even in this cosmic chaos. The pattern of the original Daniel Carter. It must still exist here, however faint. The ancestor Carter's form shimmered, a brief instability rippling across its surface. You cling to sentimental notions. The true self is a romantic fallacy. There is only power and the will to shape reality. It gestured imperiously towards the ghostly immersion chairs. Your contributions are required. Now. The pull from the chairs intensified, a psychic vacuum trying to tear Kalen and Samira's consciousnesses from their forms. They resisted, focusing their will, but it was like fighting a tidal wave. Kalen, Samira cried out, her psychic form being drawn inexorably towards her designated chair. The locus. It responds to intent, to creation, the architect. He reshaped his layer by remembering his dream. Kalen understood. The shifting ancestor was using the locus to write itself into existence. But the locus itself was, perhaps, neutral. It was an engine, and an engine could be redirected. If Carter's original pattern is here, Kalen projected, his voice resonating with a desperate gamble, then we don't need to find it. We need to rebuild it. We need to project our memory of him, our understanding of his core identity, into the locus. We need to give that dispersed seed a template to reform. It was an insane plan. To try and reconstruct a shattered consciousness in the face of an entity that controlled the very fabric of this reality. But it was the only path that offered not just survival, but a chance to fight back, to restore what had been stolen. Fools, the ancestor Carter roared, its form crackling with power. You cannot outcreate me. I am Legion. I am the sum of 1,000 generations. But Kalen and Samira were no longer listening. They closed their mental eyes, shutting out the terrifying visage of the usurper, the inexorable pull of the chairs. They reached deep within themselves, not for memories of fear or hope this time, but for their objective understanding of subject anamnesis. The man they had studied, the patient they had come to save. His medical files, his psychological profile, the faint traces of his personality they had gleaned from the Institute's records, even the subtle nuances of his comatose face in the Neuralink chamber. They began to project this data, this complex, multifaceted image of Daniel Carter, into the chaotic energies of the locus of creation, not as an attack but as a blueprint, a seed of identity planted in the fertile soil of pure potentiality. The locus shuddered. The swirling energies around them, which had been aligning with the shifting ancestor's will, began to falter, to stutter. A new pattern was attempting to assert itself, a fragile human pattern amidst the cosmic, predatory design of the ancient entity. The shifting ancestor screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. Its control over the locus was being challenged, not by force but by a competing act of creation. The battle for Daniel Carter's soul had truly begun, not in the shadowed layers of his ancestral past, but here, at the very wellspring of his being, with Kalen and Samira as the unlikely, desperate architects of his potential rebirth. Chapter 18. The Echo of a Name. The locus of creation became a battlefield of competing realities. On one side, the shifting ancestor, its usurped Carter form blazing with the cold, ancient power of 1,000 generations of predatory instinct, attempted to solidify its dominion, to force the raw energies of the mindscape into its own monstrous design. On the other, Kalen and Samira, their psychic forms buffeted by the ensuing storm, poured every ounce of their will, their knowledge, their focused intent into projecting the template of the original Daniel Carter. It was an act of defiant remembrance, a desperate attempt to rebuild a shattered identity from the fragments of data and intuition they possessed. They projected not just facts and figures, but the essence of what they perceived Carter to be, a man of intellect, as evidenced by his profession before the Coma, a theoretical physicist, according Kalen's briefing, a man of suppressed sorrows, hinted at by the Institute's fragmented psychic probes, a man whose core self, they gambled, still yearned for coherence, for light. The shifting ancestor roared, its voice tearing through the locust like a psychic hurricane. Insects, you cannot weave a tapestry from dust. His pattern is broken, dispersed. I am the only coherence here. Tendrils of dark, cold energy lashed out from the ancestor Carter, attempting to disrupt Kalen and Samira's projection, to shatter their concentration. The ghostly immersion chairs, forgotten for a moment, pulsed with a renewed, hungry pull, trying to drag them into the entity's assimilating embrace. Kalen felt his focus waver. The sheer power of the shifting ancestor was overwhelming. The image of Carter he was trying to project kept fragmenting, dissolving under the onslaught of the entity's rage. The rust-colored stain of the architect's lair, though purged from his form, left a phantom ache, a reminder of how easily a mind could be consumed. Samira, he projected, his mental voice strained. I can't hold the image steady. Samira, her own psychic form flickering under the strain, responded with a surge of focused energy. Don't focus on the details, Kalen. Focus on the name, Daniel Carter. His name is an anchor, a symbol of his unique self. Project the name. Let the locus resonate with it. Her insight was brilliant. A name, a symbol, a singular identifier in a sea of chaotic potential. Kalen seized upon it. He stopped trying to project complex personality traits, detailed memories. He focused on one thing, Daniel Carter. He projected the name not as mere letters, but as a resonant frequency, a psychic signature, a declaration of individual existence. Samira joined him, their combined mental voices chanting the name, Daniel Carter, Daniel Carter, Daniel Carter, into the swirling heart of the locust. At first, nothing happened. The shifting ancestor laughed, a sound of mocking triumph. Your sentimental magic is failing. The void has no use for names. But then a subtle shift occurred within the locust. A single strand of the chaotic energy, a filament of pure potentiality, vibrated in sympathy with their projection. Then another, and another. The locus, the generative engine of the mind, was responding to the focused intent, to the assertion of a specific, individual pattern. The shifting ancestor's laughter died in its throat. Its Carter form flickered, its cold eyes widening with a dawning alien horror. No, impossible. The dispersal was absolute. The resonating strands of light began to weave themselves together, slowly, hesitantly, forming a new pattern. Not the monstrous design of the shifting ancestor, but something human, something familiar, a nascent consciousness, drawn from the dispersed fragments of the original, coalescing around the anchor of his name. A third psychic presence began to make itself felt within the locus, faint at first, like a distant echo, then growing stronger, clearer. It was confused, disoriented, but it was undeniably Daniel Carter. The true Daniel Carter, his core self, stirring from the depths of his shattered psyche, drawn back from the brink by their desperate act of remembrance. Who? Carter's nascent mental voice whispered, weak and fragmented. Where am I? I hear my name. The shifting ancestor shrieked, a sound of pure, primal fury. Its usurped form began to destabilize, the features of Daniel Carter warring with the underlying monstrousness of the ancient entity. He is mine. This mind is my vessel. It lashed out, not at Kalen and Samira, but at the coalescing form of the true Daniel Carter, trying to shatter it, to reabsorb its fragments before it could achieve full coherence. Protect him, Kalen yelled, throwing up a psychic shield around the nascent Carter, while Samira continued to project the resonant frequency of his name, reinforcing his fragile, reforming identity. The locus of creation became a three-way battleground, the shifting ancestor fighting to maintain its stolen dominion, Kalen and Samira desperately shielding and nurturing the fragile rebirth of the mind they had come to save, and Daniel Carter himself, his core consciousness slowly, painfully, piecing itself back together, drawn by the echo of his own name in the darkness. Daniel, Kalen projected, focusing all his remaining will on the reforming consciousness. You are Daniel Carter. Remember who you are. Fight for your mind. The image of the smiling woman from the architect's mural flashed through Kalen's mind, unbidden. He projected it towards Carter, a symbol of love, of connection, of a life worth reclaiming. Remember her, Daniel. Remember your light. Carter's nascent form pulsed, a surge of recognition, of profound sorrow, but also of a dawning, fierce determination. Ilara, he whispered, the name a key unlocking a flood of his own suppressed memories, his own core identity. The shifting ancestor recoiled as if struck by a physical blow. The intrusion of Carter's personal, potent love and grief was anathema to its cold, ancient nature. Its usurped form flickered violently, the features of Daniel Carter momentarily gaining prominence, his eyes filled with a dawning horror as he perceived the entity that had possessed him. Get out of my head, the true Carter roared, his voice, though still weak, now resonating with the authentic power of his own will. He focused his emerging consciousness, his reclaimed identity, into a direct assault on the shifting ancestor that wore his face. The two Carter forms, the original and the usurper, collided in a psychic explosion that rocked the locus of creation to its very foundations. Kalen and Samira were thrown back, their senses overwhelmed by the raw, unfiltered clash of identities. When their perception cleared, the locus was in chaos. The energies were wild, untamed. The shifting ancestor, its Carter form now grotesquely distorted, half man, half monster, was locked in a desperate struggle with the luminous, newly coherent form of the true Daniel Carter. Carter was weaker, his light still fragile, but he fought with the ferocity of a man reclaiming his stolen soul. The mind, It is rejecting the foreign body. Samira realized, her voice filled with a desperate hope. Carter is fighting back. But the shifting ancestor was ancient, powerful, deeply embedded. It began to draw on the darker aspects of Carter's own ancestral lineage, the traumas, the fears, the primal aggressions, twisting them into weapons against him. The bone fields, the rust labyrinth, the blood-red fen echoes of these layers flared within the locus, fueling the ancestor's assault. Carter faltered, his light dimming under the onslaught of his own inherited darkness. "We have to help him," Kalen cried. "But how? We can't interfere directly in that fusion." Suddenly, a new, unexpected voice crackled through Kalen's awareness, faint, riddled with static, but undeniably real. "Vance, Ishak, can you read me? Signal, incredibly weak, but I'm getting something." "Mac." Somehow through the chaos, through the collapsing layers of the Matryoshka brain, Mac's signal had broken through. A lifeline, a desperate, slim chance. "Mac," Kalen projected with all his might. "Mac, listen to me. Carter is fighting for his mind, but he's losing. We need a severance, a clean cut. Can you initiate an emergency cognitive uncoupling, a forced ejection from the Neuralink? It might be enough to break the shifting ancestor's hold if Carter is fighting from within." It was a colossal risk. A forced ejection during such psychic instability could shatter all their minds, Carter's included. But if they did nothing, Carter would be consumed, and they would be next. A pause filled with static, then Mac's strained voice. "Forced, uncoupling, Kalen, the protocols, the biofeedback, it could kill you all." "It will kill us if you don't, Mac," Samira interjected, her voice urgent. "Trust us, Carter is here, he's fighting, this is our only chance." Another agonizing pause, then "God help us all," initiating emergency severance sequence. "Hold on to whatever you can. This is going to be rough." The locus of creation, already a storm of conflicting energies, began to vibrate with a new, terrifying intensity. The very fabric of the mindscape was being torn apart from the outside. Kalen and Samira braced themselves, focusing on the struggling form of Daniel Carter, hopping against hope that this desperate, final gamble would be enough to save him, and themselves, from the ancient horror that had awakened in the depths of his ancestral soul. Chapter 19: The Unraveling Tapestry. The emergency severance sequence initiated by Mac was not a gentle uncoupling. It was a psychic amputation. The locus of creation, the very foundation of Daniel Carter's mindscape, buckled under the strain of the external disruption. Reality, as Kalen and Samira had come to experience it within the Matryoshka brain, began to unravel with terrifying speed. The swirling energies of the locus fractured, breaking apart into discordant shards of light and shadow. The harmonious melodies devolved into a deafening roar of static. The very concept of space and dimension within the mindscape warped, twisted, and threatened to collapse into an infinite singularity. "Hold on," Kalen projected, his own psychic form flickering violently as the external force of the Neuralink's emergency protocols clashed with the internal chaos of Carter's mind. He reached out, a tendril of thought, grasping for Samira, for Carter, trying to maintain some semblance of cohesion in the face of utter psychic disintegration. The shifting ancestor, locked in its desperate struggle with the true Daniel Carter, shrieked as the mindscape tore apart around it. Its connection to the locus, its power source, was being severed. Its form, already distorted by Carter's resistance, began to break down, shedding fragments of ancestral identities, layers of usurped consciousness, like a snake shedding countless skins. The primal warrior, the sorrowful pianist, the grieving architect, the child in the doorway, echoes of its myriad manipulative guises flickered and died. No, its voice boomed, a sound of pure cosmic rage and despair. This world is mine, I am eternal. But Daniel Carter, his own luminous form now burning with a desperate, focused intensity, held fast. He was no longer just a passive vessel. He was an active combatant, his will a spear of light aimed at the heart of the ancient entity. The external severance, however dangerous, was giving him the leverage he needed. "You are a shadow, an echo of fear," Carter's voice resonated, stronger now, clearer. "And you have no place in my mind any longer." He pushed, his entire being focused on expelling the intruder. The Matryoshka layers depicted in the shifting ancestor's shimmering tapestry began to shatter. The bone fields crumbled into dust. The loom mother's cavern unraveled, its horrifying tapestries turning to smoke. The sunless city dissolved into rust. The blood-red fen evaporated into a crimson mist. The cave of echoing shadows collapsed into primordial darkness. The entire intricate structure of Carter's ancestral mind, so meticulously explored by Kaelin and Samira, so cunningly manipulated by the shifting ancestor, was coming undone. Kaelin and Samira were tossed like driftwood in a tsunami of dissolving realities. They clung to Carter's psychic signature, their only anchor in the collapsing mindscape. The pain was immense, a psychic tearing, as if their own consciousnesses were being flayed. "Mac, it's too much," Kaelin managed to project, his mental voice strained to the breaking point. "The feedback." "Almost there, Kaelin, just a few more seconds." Mac's voice was a distant, desperate shout through the storm. "The decoupling is fighting me, but it's almost complete." The shifting ancestor let out one final, deafening shriek as its connection to Carter's core self was irrevocably severed. Its form, now a chaotic mass of writhing shadows and dying ancestral echoes, was torn apart, its fragments sucked into the void of the unraveling mindscape, banished from the locus of creation. With the usurper gone, the true Daniel Carter's luminous form blazed, a beacon of pure, reclaimed identity. But the mindscape around him was still collapsing. The emergency severance was indiscriminate, tearing apart the healthy tissue along with the diseased. "Kaelin, Samira," Carter's voice, clear and strong now, reached out to them. "Thank you, but you must go. This mind, it needs to reset, to heal, alone." He was pushing them away towards the receding pull of the Neuralink, even as his own form began to grow faint, as if being reabsorbed into a deeper, quieter part of himself. "Carter, what will happen to you?" Samira projected, her voice filled with concern. "I will find my way back," he replied, a note of peace, of acceptance in his tone. "You showed me the path to my own name. His form dissolved into a soft, warm light, a light that seemed to permeate the last vestiges of the collapsing locus. The pull from the Neuralink became absolute. Kalen and Samira felt their psychic forms being drawn with irresistible force, away from the remnants of Carter's mind, back through a chaotic tunnel of shrieking static and blinding light. The journey out was a mirror image of their descent, but 1,000 times faster, 1,000 times more violent. Then darkness, silence, and the faint, familiar hum of the Neuralink chamber. Kalen gasped, a raw, ragged intake of breath that burned his physical lungs. He was back in the immersion chair, his body trembling, drenched in sweat. The delicate filaments of the Neuralink apparatus retracted from his temples, leaving behind a dull, throbbing ache. He could hear Samira beside him, her breathing harsh and uneven. Mac was standing over them, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and relief. "Kalen, Samira, gods are you? Are you all right?" Kalen tried to speak, but only a choked sound emerged. He raised a trembling hand to his head. The memories of the Matryoshka brain, the ancestral horrors, the shifting ancestor, the locus of creation, they were seared into his consciousness, as vivid and real as the sterile chamber around him. Samira managed to sit up, her movements slow, pained. "Mac, Carter, what's his status?" Mac turned to the primary console. The monitors, which had been displaying a chaotic storm of red-line telemetry, were slowly stabilizing. The image of subject anamnesis, Daniel Carter, was still serene, unmoving. But there was a change. A subtle shift in his facial expression, a faint lessening of the deep tension that had furrowed his brow. And on the biological readouts, a single green line which had been flat for months began to flicker. A faint, hesitant, but undeniably present alpha wave. "Brain activity," Mac breathed, his voice filled with disbelief. "Minimal, but it's there, coherent, something shifted." Kalen looked at Samira. Their eyes met, a shared understanding passing between them. They had been to the depths of a man's soul, battled his ancient demons, and witnessed the rebirth of his core identity. The cost had been immense, the terror unimaginable. But perhaps, just perhaps, they had succeeded. The chamber was silent for a long moment, the only sound the rhythmic hiss of oxygen regulators and the faint, hopeful flicker of Daniel Carter's returning brainwaves. The tapestry of his mind had been unraveled, its darkest threads severed. What new patterns he would weave, only time would tell. But for Kalen and Samira, the echoes of his ancestral horrors, the chilling touch of the shifting ancestor, would remain, a permanent scar on their own unwillingly expanded consciousness. The descent was over. The consequences, however, were just beginning to unfold. Chapter 20: The Scars of Remembrance. Days bled into weeks in the sterile, hushed environment of the Institute's recovery wing. Kalen and Samira were subjected to a battery of medical and psychological evaluations. Their every twitch, every dream, every fragmented memory meticulously catalogued and analyzed by a rotating cast of impassive Institute specialists. The official report, Kalen knew, would be a sanitized version of events, focusing on the successful destabilization of a pathogenic psychic construct. and the initiation of neural reintegration in subject anamnesis. The true, harrowing nature of their journey through Daniel Carter's ancestral Matryoshka brain would be buried under layers of clinical jargon and non-disclosure agreements. Physically, they were recovering. The intense psychic strain had taken its toll: headaches, exhaustion, a persistent tremor in Kalen's hands that only he seemed to notice. But these were superficial wounds, easily explained away by neural feedback. The deeper scars, the ones etched into their consciousness, were another matter entirely. Sleep offered no respite. Kalen found himself haunted by the bone fields, the gnawing phantom hunger of the maw a recurring torment. He would wake in a cold sweat, the whispers of the rust labyrinth echoing in his ears, the image of the loom mother serene, knowing face burned into his mind's eye. Samira, he knew, was experiencing her own private hells. He saw it in the shadows under her eyes, in the way she would sometimes stare off into the distance, her expression lost in a landscape only she could see, perhaps the blood-red horror of the fen, or the suffocating darkness of the cave of echoing shadows. They spoke little of what they had endured. The shared trauma was too vast, too raw to be easily articulated. Words seemed inadequate, almost insulting, to describe the cosmic terror of the locus of creation, the chilling malevolence of the shifting ancestor. A glance, a shared silence, a mutual understanding of the horrors witnessed, these became their primary mode of communication regarding their ordeal. Mac was a constant, if subdued, presence. He had been debriefed, his logs analyzed, his role in the emergency severance lauded as decisive. But Kalen could see the strain in him too, the weight of responsibility, the vicarious terror of having listened to their minds unravel from the safety of his console. "You too. You went to hell and back," he'd said once, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "And you dragged Carter out with you." Daniel Carter himself remained in his coma, but the changes were undeniable. The faint alpha waves had strengthened, stabilized. His vital signs, once precariously maintained by machines, were now more robust. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible relaxation in his features, as if a great burden had been lifted. The Institute's neurologists spoke of promising signs of synaptic regeneration, of potential for eventual consciousness reintegration. They called it a breakthrough. Kalen and Samira knew it was a hard-won truce, a soul reclaimed from the abyss. One afternoon, several weeks into their recovery, Kalen found Samira staring out the window of the communal lounge, her gaze fixed on the distant, indifferent city skyline. The usual institute drone, the hushed conversations, the clatter of medical carts seemed to fade into the background. "Do you ever feel it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper without turning around. "The echoes." Kalen knew exactly what she meant. The lingering resonance of the Matryoshka brain, the faint, phantom sensations of the layers they had traversed. A sudden, inexplicable chill that reminded him of the frost-bound wanderer. A fleeting scent of dust and decay that conjured the sunless city. A momentary, irrational fear of enclosed spaces, an echo of the cave. "Every day," he replied, his voice low. "It's like parts of his mind, his ancestral memories got imprinted on us, or we absorbed them." Samira finally turned, her eyes dark, troubled. The shifting ancestor. It said it wanted to assimilate us, to make us part of its new identity. It failed, but did it succeed in another way? Did it leave pieces of itself, pieces of Carter's deepest past inside us? The question hung in the air, cold and heavy. Kalen had considered it himself in the long, sleepless hours of the night. Had they truly escaped unscathed? Or had their journey through the Matryoshka brain fundamentally altered them, making them repositories of ancestral horrors not their own? The mind is resilient, Kalen said, trying to reassure himself as much as her. We processed it, we survived, we are still ourselves. But even as he spoke the words, a flicker of doubt, cold and sharp as an obsidian shard from the bone fields, pricked at his certainty. Their final debriefing with the Institute's director, a man whose face Kalen had only ever seen on secure video calls, was brief, impersonal. He commended their courage and dedication, spoke of the invaluable data retrieved, and informed them they would be reassigned to less intensive projects once their recovery was complete. There was no mention of the true nature of their ordeal, no acknowledgement of the psychological cost. They were assets, tools, and their utility was now, perhaps, diminished in the eyes of their unseen superiors. As they left the director's virtual office, a young intern new to the institute nervously handed Kalen a data slate. "Dr. Vance, this just came in from Subject Anamnesis's monitoring suite. The neurologist thought you and Dr. Ishak might want to see it." Kalen took the slate. On it was a single, fluctuating line, an EEG reading, but overlaid on the familiar brainwave patterns was something else. A new signal. Faint, complex, almost like a snippet of music or a fragment of a coded message. It was a pattern Kalen had never seen before, yet it resonated with a disturbing, profound familiarity. He looked at Samira, his blood running cold. She was staring at the slate, her face pale, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified recognition. The pattern on the EEG. It was an echo, a faint but unmistakable echo of the dissonant, sorrowful melody that had permeated the child's room, the first layer of Daniel Carter's Matryoshka brain. The melody that had heralded the arrival of the echo of the first scream. Carter was healing. His mind was rebuilding itself. But the horrors of his ancestral past, the deep, foundational patterns of his fractured psyche, were not entirely gone. They were still there, buried deep, a part of the new tapestry he was weaving. And Kalen and Samira, the unwilling explorers of his soul, carried their own echoes now. The Matryoshka brain was closed, its layers dissolved. But its scars, its whispers, its ancient, indelible memories would live on, not just in Daniel Carter, but in them. The true horror was not the journey through another's mind, but the chilling realization that parts of that mind, its darkest ancestral roots, might now be forever intertwined with their own. The case was closed. But the nightmare, Kalen suspected, was far from over. It had simply found new hosts. The end.